Tonight we stand on the darkened waters outside Constantinople in the late 7th century, when the greatest city of the Eastern Roman world faces a danger that seems almost impossible to escape. Along the horizon, enemy ships gather beneath a smoky evening sky, their sails dim against the fading light. The sea smells of salt, tar, wet timber, and the faint smoke of cooking fires drifting from crowded decks. Somewhere behind the enormous walls, craftsmen prepare a weapon whose exact composition will trouble historians for more than 1,000 years. Medieval chroniclers describe streams of flame hurled from Byzantine ships, while modern researchers at institutions including Oxford University have examined the surviving accounts with careful skepticism. Archaeology confirms the sophistication of Byzantine military engineering. Yet one disturbing problem remains: nobody can say with certainty what Greek fire truly was. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while the lamps of Constantinople begin to glow across the water, you might leave your location and local time in the comments. There is something strangely fitting about imagining people listening from distant places while an ancient city waits beneath the same night sky. You're close enough now to hear the harbour. Ropes tighten against wooden posts, oars knock softly against hulls, and somewhere a metal fitting gives a low hollow clang. Constantinople is not merely a city in this age, it is a fortress, a marketplace, a religious temple, and the political heart of an empire that still calls itself Roman. Its population moves through streets filled with merchants, soldiers, monks, sailors, labourers, and officials. Marble monuments rave beside crowded workshops, while great churches dominate the skyline above tiled roofs and narrow lanes. The city occupies one of the most valuable positions on Earth. To the north lies the narrow channel leading toward the Black Sea. To the south stretches the Sea of Marmara, opening eventually toward the Mediterranean. Whoever controls these waters can influence trade, armies, grain shipments, and diplomacy across enormous distances. That geography gives Constantinople wealth. It also makes the city a prize that ambitious rulers cannot easily ignore. During the 7th century, the Eastern Roman Empire is under tremendous pressure. Territories that once supplied taxes, soldiers, and grain have fallen away. New armies expand through regions that have belonged to Rome for centuries. The political world around Constantinople changes with alarming speed. Historians studying this period at universities such as Yale University and Oxford University emphasize how dramatically the balance of power shifts across the Eastern Mediterranean. The empire survives, but survival is no longer something its rulers can casually assume. Then comes the weapon. A Byzantine chronicler writing about these troubled decades preserves the name Callinicos, a man traditionally described as an engineer or craftsman from the Syrian city of Heliopolis. According to the account, he flees westward and brings knowledge of a special incendiary substance to the imperial capital. The story is wonderfully convenient. One refugee arrives with one secret, the empire uses it, and Constantinople survives. History, unfortunately, rarely behaves so neatly. Modern scholars disagree about how literally this story should be understood. Some accept that Callinicos may have contributed an important technical improvement. Others suspect that incendiary weapons already existed in earlier forms, and that his role became exaggerated through later storytelling. The surviving evidence does not allow the matter to settle comfortably. That uncertainty is important because Greek fire may not have been invented in a single moment at all. Your mind drifts toward the workshops near the imperial harbour. Imagine rough benches stained with oils and resins. Clay vessels stand beside bronze fittings. Men work by lamplight, their hands carrying the scent of pitch, metal, smoke, and something sharper that you cannot quite identify. Perhaps one worker knows how to prepare a liquid mixture, Another understands pressure inside a bronze container. A sailor knows how to aim the projecting tube without setting his own ship ablaze. An officer understands when the wind makes deployment too dangerous. None of them necessarily knows everything. That possibility changes the mystery. Greek fire may never have been a simple recipe written on one convenient piece of parchment. It may have been a technical system, dependent upon ingredients, equipment, temperature, steady training, and experience. Losing any important part of that system could make the weapon impossible to reproduce. Even if someone remembered several ingredients perfectly, records from Byzantine warfare confirm that incendiary substances were not unique to Constantinople. Ancient armies had already used burning oils, pitch, sulphurous mixtures, and flaming projectiles. Fire had been part of siege warfare for centuries. What appears unusual about the Byzantine weapon is the combination of combustible material with specialized delivery methods, particularly naval devices capable of projecting flame toward enemy vessels. That detail matters on a wooden sea. A medieval warship is an uncomfortable collection of combustible objects. Timber forms the hull. Rope hangs everywhere. Sails, cloth, wax, oil, pitch, and dry wooden fittings surround the crew. Even ordinary flame is dangerous aboard such a vessel. A projected burning liquid creates something far more frightening, because panic can destroy discipline long before flames destroy the ship itself. One curious tradition claims that Greek fire could continue burning upon water. This detail has inspired centuries of speculation. Petroleum-based mixtures can float and burn on the surface, which offers a plausible explanation without requiring any supernatural chemistry. Yet medieval observers, watching fire spread across dark seawater, would have had little reason to describe the event calmly. From the deck of an approaching ship, the sight may have seemed almost unnatural. You hear the imagined roar now, low and sudden. A bronze tube points from a Byzantine vessel. Sailors brace themselves around unfamiliar machinery. Then a stream of burning material appears against the darkness, bright enough to reflect from waves and shields. Smoke rolls across the water. Men shout from both fleets. Though distance blurs their words into a confused human murmur, the flame itself becomes the language everyone understands. One fringe theory has suggested that the weapon depended heavily on quicklime, a substance that reacts strongly with water and releases heat. It is an intriguing idea, especially because medieval descriptions sometimes emphasize the difficulty of extinguishing the flames. Yet experimental chemistry has not produced a decisive case showing that quicklime alone explains the reported behavior. The debate remains open, and many historians favor petroleum-based ingredients combined with resins or other combustible materials. Researchers examining ancient military technology often return to this same difficulty. Written sources describe effects, not laboratory procedures. Chroniclers care about battles, divine favour, emperors, and victories. They rarely provide the kind of exact measurements that a modern chemist would desire. A sentence about miraculous flame may preserve an eyewitness impression, a rumour, a literary flourish, or some mixture of all three. So you remain on the water, uncertain. The walls of Constantinople rise ahead, enormous and strangely calm beneath the stars. Somewhere inside them, knowledge is being guarded that later generations will struggle to reconstruct. Perhaps the true secret is already divided among many hands. Perhaps even the Emperor does not know every technical detail. Perhaps the weapon is less a mysterious liquid than an entire culture of specialized practice, hidden inside workshops that leave almost no archaeological trace. The city sleeps uneasily while patrol boats move across the harbour. You can smell wax smoke from a nearby lantern and feel damp air settling against the wood beneath your hands. Nothing here feels like the beginning of a legend. It feels practical, tense, and human. And that may be where the deeper mystery begins. A weapon remembered as almost magical may have depended on ordinary people performing difficult tasks with extraordinary precision. Their names are mostly gone, their tools have vanished, their instruction, if they existed in writing, have not survived. Yet the fire remains in memory. For more than 1,000 years, historians will return to those glowing descriptions and ask the same quiet question. How can a technology powerful enough to protect an empire disappear so completely that even modern science cannot confidently recreate it? The answer begins not with flame, but with the fragile human world that carried its secret. The pressure around Constantinople grows slowly, then all at once, across the eastern Mediterranean, armies that once seemed distant now move with confidence through territories that have belonged to the Roman world for generations. Cities change hands, trade routes shift, and imperial officials discover that maps can become outdated within a few campaigning seasons. Constantinople remains immense, wealthy, and intimidating. But its rulers understand that stone walls cannot solve every problem. An enemy capable of reaching the sea can surround the capital from directions that earlier emperors had once considered secure. By the 7th century, the Arab conquests have transformed the political landscape of the Near East. Syria, Egypt, and other provinces once central to imperial wealth are no longer controlled from Constantinople. Historians at institutions including Princeton University and the University of Chicago have long studied the speed and complexity of these campaigns, emphasizing that the transformations involved military strength, diplomacy, taxation, local rivalries, and exhausted imperial structures. What survives in the Byzantine capital is therefore not a confident empire expanding outward. It is a government learning how to endure contraction without allowing contraction to become collapse. You can feel that anxiety in the harbour. Warehouses remain busy, but every shipment matters more when distant provinces are gone. Grain, timber, metal, rope, wine, oil, and weapons arrive under heavier supervision. Sailors gossip about fleets gathering farther to the south. Officials count hulls, inspect crews, and argue about supplies. The city still has markets filled with spices and polished goods, yet beneath ordinary commerce sits a more serious rhythm. Constantinople is preparing to become something like a locked chest surrounded by impatient hands. The first great Arab attempts to break Byzantine control of the capital are difficult to reconstruct precisely. Medieval sources were written at different times, sometimes with conflicting chronologies and exaggerated numbers. Scholars continue to debate whether certain campaigns should be understood as one prolonged siege or as a sequence of raids, blockades, and seasonal operations. That uncertainty does not weaken the larger picture. Constantinople had become the central target of a rapidly expanding power, and control of the city would have carried enormous strategic and symbolic value. Imagine watching an enemy fleet appear from the southern horizon. At first, the ships are tiny shapes against the glittering water. By midday, individual sails become visible. By evening, the number of vessels is harder to ignore. Their arrival changes the sound of the city. Bells signal warnings, harbour crews shout orders, and soldiers move towards assigned positions. Families living near exposed districts carry valuables indoors. Merchants close shutters earlier than usual. Priests gather congregations beneath high domes where incense curls upward into shadows. The defenders possess one immense advantage. Constantinople is protected by geography almost as much as architecture. The city sits on a peninsula, guarded by water on several sides and by formidable land walls to the west. The Golden Horn provides a sheltered harbour, while currents around the Bosporus and Sea of Marmara complicate navigation. Any attacker must therefore solve several different military problems at once. Ships must be supplied, armies must be fought, camps must remain healthy, and communication across water must continue despite weather, currents, and Byzantine resistance. Records confirm that the famous land walls were among the most sophisticated defensive systems of the medieval world. Built and expanded over centuries, they combined multiple lines of fortification, towers, ditches, and elevated firing positions. Archaeologists and architectural historians have carefully mapped their surviving sections, showing how defenders could force attackers through layers of danger. Yet walls alone could not stop a fleet. If hostile ships controlled the surrounding waters, Constantinople could be starved, isolated, or attacked from vulnerable coastal positions. That is where naval warfare becomes essential. A Byzantine warship moves differently from a merchant vessel. It is designed for speed, maneuver, and coordinated action. Oarsmen sit below or along the sides, pulling in disciplined rhythm while officers watch wind and current. Marines prepare bows, shields, stones, spears, and incendiary devices. The crew must obey quickly because confusion on a crowded deck can become fatal within seconds. In calm water, the vessel can turn sharply. In rough water, even experienced sailors struggle to keep formation. For the attackers, approaching such ships is dangerous even without unusual weapons. Ramming, boarding, archery, and thrown incendiaries can all destroy men and vessels, yet the psychological effect of projected fire introduces another problem. A commander must persuade sailors to row towards something they cannot easily extinguish. That challenge is easy to underestimate from the safety of modern distance. Discipline may survive arrows because arrows behave predictably. Flame spreading across timber, oil, and rope is less cooperative. A quirky detail from later medieval military writing suggests that defenders experimented with animal skins, vinegar, and other protective coverings against incendiary attack. Some accounts describe treated hides hung over vulnerable surfaces, possibly to reduce the chance of ignition. Whether every method worked as claimed remains uncertain. Medieval warfare encouraged improvisation, and crews often relied on whatever materials could be adapted quickly. A wet hide over timber may sound primitive, but aboard a wooden vessel facing burning liquid, primitive solutions suddenly become rather respectable. The struggle around Constantinople also depends on weather. Winds can change during the day, turning a promising attack into a dangerous drift. Currents may separate ships that intended to advance together. Summer heat exhausts crews and spoils supplies. Winter storms can damage vessels more effectively than enemy weapons. Modern military historians sometimes focus on strategy, but environmental conditions quietly shape every decision. A siege fleet cannot simply remain at sea indefinitely. Men require fresh water, food, repairs, shelter, and confidence. For a moment, it feels as though the entire conflict rests upon patience. The attackers wait for weakness. The defenders wait for mistakes. Ships patrol narrow waters while watchmen study distant sails from towers. Fires burn in camps outside the city, and smoke hangs low during still evenings. Each side knows that a single dramatic battle may matter less than weeks of hunger. Sickness, broken equipment, or missed deliveries. Siege warfare often rewards whoever can continue functioning when ordinary life has become almost impossible. Open scholarly debate still surrounds the exact role Greek fire played in the survival of Constantinople during these campaigns. Traditional narratives sometimes give the weapon a nearly decisive importance, presenting it as the technological miracle that saved the empire. Many modern historians prefer a broader explanation. Fortifications, naval skill, logistics, weather, diplomacy, disease, and enemy supply difficulties probably mattered alongside incendiary weapons. No serious reconstruction can reduce the outcome to one substance fired from one bronze tuber. That wider view makes the story more compelling. Constantinople survives because many systems work together under pressure. Sailors must row, engineers must repair walls, Farmers must produce food, merchants must move supplies, officials must collect taxes, priests must maintain morale. Soldiers must remain at their posts even when rumours spread through streets faster than reliable news. A secret weapon may strengthen the defence, but only a functioning society can keep using it. The enemy fleets remain visible beyond the water. Their presence turns ordinary evenings into long stretches of listening. You hear oars somewhere beyond the darkness, then nothing. A dog barks near a warehouse, sandals scrape over stone as a patrol passes beneath a gate. In the distance, a ship lantern shifts position and disappears behind another hull. Every small sound feels significant because nobody knows which movement will begin the next attack. Constantinople endures not as an untouchable city, but as a frightened and highly organised one. Its survival depends on people who understand that failure would reshape the entire region. Somewhere among them, specialised crews prepare the strange incendiary equipment that later generations will remember with fascination. Yet the greater truth is quieter. The weapon matters because the city still possesses the institutions capable of making, storing, transporting, and using it under conditions of extraordinary stress. The siege therefore becomes more than a contest between armies. It becomes a test of whether knowledge can remain useful while the world surrounding it is changing. Fire may leap across the sea, but behind every burst of flame stands a network of workshops, officers, sailors, stores, and commands. Remove enough of that network, and even the most feared weapon becomes nothing more than a rumour preserved in old pages. A single name begins to emerge from the confusion of 7th century warfare, and it belongs to a man who stands somewhere between history and legend. Callinicos is remembered as a refugee from the Syrian city of Heliopolis, a skilled craftsman who reaches Constantinople carrying knowledge that may have changed naval warfare. The surviving account is brief, frustratingly brief, and this is part of what makes it so powerful. You are given a name, a place, and an invention, but almost nothing about the man himself. There is no diary, no workshop record, no list of ingredients, only a shadow remains. Heliopolis had been part of the Eastern Roman world before the great political transformations of the 7th century. The city stood in a region rich with ancient traditions of metalworking, engineering, trade, and chemical craft. When territories changed hands, people moved with them, carrying skills that could not be packed into crates. Artisans, soldiers, administrators, merchants, and religious figures crossed borders that had suddenly become dangerous. Callinicos may have been one among many such displaced specialists, although his name alone would later become attached to an extraordinary military technology. The main narrative placing him at the centre comes from a Byzantine chronicler writing long after the events themselves. That delay matters. Historians at Oxford University and Harvard University regularly emphasise the difficulties created by sources composed generations after the period they describe. Memory changes as it travels, political needs reshape stories. Complicated developments become easier to understand when later writers attach them to a memorable individual. In that sense, Callinicos may be historical, symbolic, or some uneasy mixture of both. You can imagine his journey only in fragments. Roads across Syria are crowded with refugees, merchants, soldiers, carts and animals. Dust sticks to clothing. Water becomes precious. News arrives irregularly, carried by travellers who often disagree about what they have seen. A skilled craftsman moving westward might protect his knowledge carefully, especially if that knowledge had military value. Perhaps Callinicos carries notes. Perhaps he carries samples. Perhaps he carries nothing except experience lodged inside his memory and hands. That last possibility is particularly important. Technical knowledge in the ancient and medieval world often depended upon practice rather than detailed written instructions. A craftsman might know the right temperature by colour, the correct mixture by smell, or the proper pressure by the feel of a vessel beneath his fingers. Such knowledge is difficult to preserve in books because much of it is never formally described. An apprentice learns by watching. A master corrects mistakes through gestures, warnings, and repeated demonstration. The process can be precise without ever becoming fully textual. Records confirm that Byzantine society relied heavily on specialized professional communities for military production. Armourers, shipbuilders, metalworkers, rope makers, carpenters, and other craftsmen supported the state through skills accumulated across generations. An imperial arsenal was therefore not simply a warehouse, it was a living concentration of expertise. If Callinicos truly arrived with a new incendiary method, he would have entered a world capable of testing, modifying, and integrating his ideas into existing naval systems. This makes the usual story less simple and far more interesting. A refugee does not necessarily walk into the palace, whisper a formula to the emperor, and transform history overnight. He might instead meet officials who send him to engineers. Those engineers might reject some claims, test others, and adapt whatever works. Shipwrights could redesign fittings. Metalworkers could alter tubes and containers. Naval officers might discover that the substance behaves differently in wind, humidity, or rough seas. Innovation becomes collective. One curious detail appears in later traditions that exaggerate the secrecy surrounding the weapon. Some accounts suggest that emperors claim the formula had been revealed by divine authority and must never be shared with foreigners. This may reflect genuine political messaging rather than literal technological history. Byzantine rulers often wrapped military success in sacred language, presenting imperial survival as evidence of heavenly protection. A useful weapon could therefore become more than equipment. It could become part of the empire's identity. That transformation would also protect the secret socially. If knowledge is described as sacred, revealing it becomes more than professional betrayal. It becomes a moral offense. Craftsmen may be discouraged from discussing their work even with other imperial servants. Officials may separate responsibilities so that no single workshop controls every stage. The mystery grows not because everyone knows the formula and remains silent, but because different people may know different parts and understand only the portion required for their task. Scholars continue to debate whether Callinicos invented Greek fire at all. Some researchers argue that petroleum-based incendiaries had already been used in earlier centuries, making a sudden invention unlikely. Others suggest that his contribution may have involved improving the delivery system rather than creating a completely new substance. He could have refined a pump, altered fuel preparation, or adapted existing techniques for the naval use. The surviving evidence cannot confidently distinguish among these possibilities. Your fingers brush against rough wood as an imaginary workshop takes shape around you. A lamp burns beside bronze components. Resin warms in a covered vessel, producing a thick scent that clings to the air. Nearby, someone tests a valve or seal by hand. The work is careful because mistakes here are expensive and dangerous. Nobody uses modern scientific notation. Nobody writes a convenient, standardized manual, yet the workers understand materials through repeated contact, and their practical knowledge may exceed what surviving text can reveal. A fringe suggestion occasionally raised in popular discussions is that Callinicos possessed some lost chemical tradition inherited from ancient scholars of Alexandria or the Near East. The idea sounds wonderfully mysterious, which is usually a warning sign. There is no solid evidence for a hidden scientific lineage preserving an advanced secret formula across centuries. Still, the broader possibility of accumulated craft traditions is entirely reasonable. Recipes, methods, and industrial knowledge did move between regions through craftsmen and merchants. The difference is subtle but important. Lost knowledge does not require a secret academy. It can disappear inside ordinary workshops. Imagine an experienced metalworker dying without training a successor. A sailor retires before passing along a difficult technique. A workshop closes during political unrest. A written note is destroyed because nobody realizes its future importance. None of these events feels dramatic when it happens. Together, they can erase capabilities that once seemed permanent. The disappearance of technical traditions is often quieter than their invention. Kallinikos therefore becomes fascinating, not because he solves the mystery, but because he reveals how fragile invention can be. If one person contributes essential knowledge, that contribution must somehow enter a larger system to survive. His experience must be translated into materials, tools, procedures, and trained personnel. Otherwise, the secret disappears with the inventor himself. For a moment, you can almost see him standing near the harbour, older perhaps, watching crews test equipment whose design has already changed from whatever he first proposed. The Empire may celebrate the weapon, yet the individual behind it recedes into obscurity. That is common in technological history. Institutions preserve useful inventions while gradually forgetting the people whose hands first made them practical. The night air carries the smell of heated resin and seawater. Somewhere beyond the workshop walls, ships wait in darkness. Kallinikos remains only a name attached to a possibility, neither fully confirmed nor safely dismissed. Perhaps he was an inventor. Perhaps he was an improver. Perhaps later generations needed a single human figure to represent decades of experimentation. His true secret may never have been a recipe at all. It may have been the ability to recognize which pieces of existing knowledge could be combined into something far more dangerous. And once that insight entered Imperial service, the man himself could fade away while the fire continued speaking for him. The first descriptions of Greek fire do not read like laboratory reports. They arrive through chronicles, military narratives, and the frightened impressions of people watching flame behave in unfamiliar ways. You encounter a world where observation is filtered through fear, religion, rumour, and memory. A sailor sees burning liquid strike a hull and later tells someone that the sea itself caught fire. A chronicler hears that story years later and gives it a place inside a larger account of imperial survival. By the time the scene reaches you, the physical event and the remembered event have already begun to separate. Medieval witnesses often describe weapons through their effects rather than their composition. They notice noise, brightness, smoke, heat, and panic. Those details matter because they reveal what the weapon felt like to experience. A stream of flame crossing open water would have been startling enough without supernatural explanations. Reflections would multiply the light across waves, making a single burning patch appear larger. Smoke could hide the source. Wind might bend the flame sideways. In darkness, distance becomes difficult to judge and terror fills the gaps. Researchers at institutions such as Yale University and Cambridge University have long treated medieval military chronicles with both respect and caution. Such texts preserve essential information, but they are rarely neutral recordings. Writers choose which events deserve emphasis. They borrow language from earlier authors. They frame victories as signs of courage, divine protection, or imperial legitimacy. A weapon associated with the defense of Constantinople could therefore acquire symbolic importance far beyond its actual tactical performance. You can hear how easily exaggeration begins. Imagine two ships separated by the dark water and smoke. The first vessel releases a burning stream. The second catches fire near its bow. Sailors throw water, but the flames continue because the fuel floats across wet surfaces. Someone shouts that the water feeds the fire. That statement travels faster than any careful explanation involving density. oils, resins, or surface combustion, within a generation, the weapon no longer merely resists water. It becomes a fire that conquers water. Records confirm that petroleum and other hydrocarbons were known in parts of the ancient Near East. Natural bitumen and naphtha had practical uses in construction, medicine, lighting, and warfare. Classical authors had already described unusual flammable substances centuries earlier. These materials could ignite rapidly and spread across water if properly prepared. Their existence does not reveal the exact Greek fire formula, but it makes several dramatic medieval observations chemically plausible without requiring a lost miracle substance. The sound may have contributed equally to the legend. Some accounts suggest that projected fire emerged with a roaring or rushing noise. A pressurized liquid moving through a tube can produce an intimidating sound even before ignition. Add combustion, metal fittings, shouted commands, creaking timber, and men scrambling across decks, and the experience becomes overwhelming. The weapon attacks more than wood, it attacks concentration. Psychological warfare is difficult to measure because panic leaves fewer physical traces than broken walls, yet commanders throughout history have understood that fear can reorganize a battlefield instantly. A weapon that soldiers believe cannot be extinguished becomes more powerful with every retelling. Sailors may hesitate before entering its range, formations may loosen, crews may abandon damaged vessels earlier than they otherwise would. Reputation begins doing part of the weapon's work. A peculiar detail preserved in later traditions claims that certain substances could extinguish the flames when ordinary water could not. Vinegar appears in some stories, while others mention sand or even urine. Such claims are difficult to verify and may combine genuine firefighting practice with folklore. Sand can smother some burning liquids by limiting oxygen. Wet coverings can protect surfaces temporarily. Vinegar has no magical property against petroleum flames, but sailors desperate for any advantage would naturally experiment with whatever they had aboard. That experimentation helps explain why witness reports can become contradictory. One crew may encounter a small quantity of burning material and successfully smother it. Another may face a larger spill that spreads underneath shields and ropes. Weather changes everything. So does the condition of the ship. Dry timber behaves differently from soaked timber. Wind can push flames toward attackers or defenders. A weapon that seems unstoppable during one engagement may perform poorly during another. Scholars still debate how far Greek fire could actually be projected. Popular images sometimes suggest long jets of flame crossing enormous distances, almost like modern industrial flamethrowers. The surviving evidence does not justify such confidence. Mechanical pumps, pressure vessels, and bronze tubing could certainly move liquids, but practical range would depend on pressure, viscosity, nozzle design, and safety. Experimental reconstructions have shown possibilities, yet no surviving Byzantine apparatus gives researchers a complete model. You stand on a wooden deck and feel the limitation immediately. A ship rolls beneath your feet. The bronze tube cannot remain perfectly steady. Fuel must be stored without leaking. Pressure must be created without rupturing the vessel. Ignition must happen at the correct point. The crew must avoid spraying burning liquid across their own bow. Suddenly, the magnificent secret begins to look less like magic and more like a dangerous engineering problem performed while the floor moves constantly. This may explain why eyewitnesses focused on successful attacks. Failures are less memorable. A pump that jams produces no legend. A flame blown backward by wind becomes an embarrassment best omitted from triumphal histories. Chroniclers usually record the spectacular moment when the weapon works, not the tedious hours of maintenance that make that moment possible. The written record therefore creates a subtle illusion of reliability. The visual appearance may also have changed depending on ingredients. Resin can thicken fuel and help it cling to surfaces. Sulfur can influence flame characteristics and odour. Petroleum products can burn with heavy smoke. Different batches might not behave identically, especially without modern refining standards. A witness who saw one version could describe something quite different from another observer decades later. The name Greek fire may conceal several evolving mixtures rather than a single unchanging substance. A fringe idea proposes that the flames included chemical additives capable of producing unusual colours. Sulphurous compounds and metal contamination can alter flame appearance, so the general idea is not impossible, yet claims of brilliantly coloured supernatural fire are poorly supported. Medieval writers often used vivid language symbolically. Red, golden, or white flame might describe intensity rather than precise chemistry. The distinction matters because poetic description can easily masquerade as technical evidence. The surviving texts become most valuable when several independent details converge. They repeatedly suggest a liquid incendiary. They associate it strongly with naval warfare. They describe projection through specialized equipment. They emphasize difficulty extinguishing it. Those recurring features form a reasonable core. Even when the surrounding language becomes dramatic, historians work by separating that core from embellishment. Much as an archaeologist removes layers of soil without assuming every object belongs to the same moment. You begin to sense why the mystery persists. The witnesses tell you what astonished them, but rarely what you most want to know. They give you flames and smoke, not proportions. They preserve fear, not pressure measurements. They remember emperors and victories, not the names of technicians standing beside fuel containers. The sea grows quieter in your imagination. A patch of burning liquid drifts away from a damaged ship, breaking into smaller islands of orange light. Reflections shiver beneath them. To a frightened sailor, it may seem that the water itself has betrayed the natural order. To a modern historian, the scene offers something more subtle. The weapon's legend was built from real physical effects, imperfect observation, and centuries of retelling. Greek fire did not need to violate nature to become terrifying. It only needed to behave in ways its victims did not understand. Inside the imperial arsenal, the mystery changes its shape. The sea is no longer the centre of attention. Here, the air is close and warm, filled with the scent of oil, charcoal, resin, damp rope, and heated metal. You pass through guarded doors into a world of benches, storage jars, bronze fittings, leather seals, timber frames, and tools polished by years of use. The people working here are not magicians, and that they do not behave like keepers of a supernatural flame. They measure, heat, test, mend, carry, and watch. Their craft depends on discipline. Constantinople supports an enormous administrative system, and military production belongs within that larger structure. The Byzantine state controls arsenals, workshops, dockyards, and supply networks capable of serving armies and fleets across great distances. Historians at Princeton University and Columbia University have emphasized how strongly imperial survival depended on taxation, logistics, and organized labor. A weapon is useless if the government cannot obtain its materials. Pay its craftsmen, protect its workshops, and deliver finished equipment to trained crews. You notice how many different specialists move through the arsenal. One worker shapes bronze tubing over heat. Another checks a wooden support for cracks. A third handles sealed containers with unusual care. Nearby, men twist rope, repair leather, and inspect fastenings. Each task appears ordinary when viewed alone. Yet together they create something that no single craft could produce. The weapon begins to resemble a complicated machine hidden inside a larger machine of government. Records from the Byzantine world confirm that specialized state workshops existed for military and naval production. Constantinople maintained dockyards where ships could be built, repaired, and fitted for service. Imperial authorities also supervised arms manufacture and the storage of strategic materials. The exact organisation changed over time, but the broader pattern is clear. Technical knowledge lived inside institutions that could gather skilled labour and expensive resources in one protected place. Security therefore becomes part of production. Guards do not merely prevent theft of finished weapons, they also control movement, access, and conversation. A visiting merchant might see bronze fittings without understanding their purpose. A junior worker may handle one ingredient while remaining unaware of the final mixture. A sailor may know how to operate a device but never enter the workshop where it is assembled. Secrecy can emerge naturally from restricted access long before anyone writes an official command forbidding disclosure. The arrangement may have been deliberate. States throughout history have protected sensitive military skills by separating stages of manufacture. Byzantine rulers had strong reasons to do the same. If one worker defects, he cannot reveal everything. If a container is captured, the enemy receives an object without the knowledge needed to reproduce it. If a workshop is infiltrated, the visitor may understand only one fragment. The secret survives because no outsider can easily see the whole system at once. A short metallic knock echoes through the room. Someone tests a fitting. The bronze components deserve special attention because they are expensive and difficult to make, and essential to any pressurized device. A tube intended to carry heated or combustible liquid must resist leaks and deformation. Seams need care, valves need precision. Connections must remain secure while a ship moves beneath them. Even a small weakness could injure the crew using the weapon. The metallurgy itself, therefore, becomes part of the secret, whether anyone consciously treats it that way. The fuel presents another problem. If petroleum products were involved, the Empire required reliable access to sources, transport routes, storage methods, and containers capable of reducing accidental ignition. Natural petroleum was known in regions east of Constantinople, but moving dangerous liquids over long distances was not simple. Merchants might transport them in ceramic vessels or other containers, yet military use demanded greater consistency. A poor batch could burn weakly. A contaminated batch could behave unpredictably. This is where archaeology becomes frustrating. Organic fuels rarely leave neat evidence after centuries. Workshops are rebuilt, containers break and are reused, metal fittings are melted down, timber disappears. A modern excavator may find a bronze fragment without knowing whether it belonged to a pump, a ship, or an unrelated machine. The most important parts of the system are exactly the kinds of materials most likely to vanish. Researchers at Stanford University have often explored how technological knowledge can be distributed across communities rather than stored in individual minds. That insight applies strongly here. A master bronze worker understands pressure and metal behaviour. A fuel preparer understands heating and mixture consistency. A ship officer understands timing and wind direction. A sailor understands handling under stress. None of these people needs complete theoretical knowledge. The system works because their skills overlap just enough. That overlap also creates fragility. If one craft disappears, the whole chain weakens. One quirky possibility is that workers use sensory cues that were never written down. A mixture might be judged by colour under lamplight. The correct temperature might be recognised by smell. A metal fitting might be tested by sound when tapped. Craftsmen in many pre-modern industries relied on such methods because precise instruments were unavailable or unnecessary. These habits can be remarkably accurate, but they are difficult to preserve once the practitioners are gone. Imagine trying to reconstruct such a process from a written line, saying only heat until ready. The instruction looks simple. In practice, ready may mean a precise stage learned through years of repetition, too cool, and the material behaves incorrectly, too hot, and it becomes dangerous. The missing knowledge lies between the words. Scholars continue to debate how centralized Greek fire production actually was. One view suggests that the imperial government guarded a tightly controlled recipe prepared only in specialized facilities. Another possibility is that several arsenals or units possessed related methods, with variations in fuel and equipment. The surviving sources cannot settle the question. Central control would explain strong secrecy, while distributed production might better explain the weapon's long service across changing political conditions. You move deeper into the arsenal and encounter storage rooms where order matters as much as secrecy. Containers are separated from open flame, metal pieces lie arranged by size, spare leather seals hang from hooks, buckets of sand stand nearby, perhaps for ordinary fires rather than anything mysterious. The place feels less like an alchemist's chamber and more like a disciplined industrial workshop. That distinction matters because later imagination loves hidden formulas. A secret recipe is easy to understand, a secret organization is harder to picture. Yet the second may have been more important. A government can protect ingredients by controlling trade, it can protect equipment by restricting workshops, it can protect procedures by training only selected crews, it can protect experience by keeping skilled families or professional groups inside imperial service. Over time, these protections create an invisible wall around the technology. Outsiders may see the flames and even capture pieces of equipment while remaining unable to reproduce the complete effect. There is also a human cost to such secrecy. Craftsmen who know valuable techniques may find their movements limited. Officers may be forbidden to discuss equipment outside their unit. Apprentices may learn only from approved masters. Knowledge that is highly protected becomes dependent on political stability because fewer people are allowed to carry it forward. That dependence is easy to miss while the empire is strong, the workshops are staffed, the materials arrive, salaries are paid, ships return for repairs, orders pass from officials to craftsmen with familiar regularity. Everything appears permanent because the system has functioned for years. But permanence is an illusion institutions often create very well. You stop beside a bronze fitting cooling on a stone surface. It looks ordinary, almost dull. And that's precisely the point. The secret of Greek fire may have rested in hundreds of ordinary objects and habits that nobody considered remarkable. They're none to describe in detail a valve shape, a sealing method, a heating sequence, a storage rule, a sailor's gesture, a craftsman's practiced ear. The arsenal keeps all of them together. And while it does, the weapon lives. The bronze siphon changes everything because it turns Greek fire from a dangerous substance into a controlled weapon. You can picture the device fixed near the bow of a warship, surrounded by men who know exactly where to stand and when to move. The sea rolls beneath them, timber groans, and every motion of the vessel affects the aim. A liquid incendiary on its own is only fuel. A pressurized system gives that fuel direction, timing, and range. The machine becomes the bridge between chemistry and battle. Byzantine sources describe specialized projecting devices mounted on ships, and modern historians have treated these descriptions as evidence of deliberate engineering rather than simple throwing mechanisms. Researchers at Oxford University and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology have examined historical pumping systems and ancient hydraulic principles more broadly, showing how pre-modern societies could achieve impressive control over liquids without modern machinery. The essential ideas were already known. Pressure, valves, reservoirs, and pipes belong to a long technological tradition. You feel the rough deck beneath your feet as a crew prepares the apparatus. One sailor checks the tube, another watches the fuel container, a third waits near an ignition point. The sequence matters. If pressure builds too early, something may rupture. If ignition comes too late, unburned liquid may splash uselessly across the water. If the nozzle shifts unexpectedly, the weapon becomes a threat to its own crew. Precision matters more than spectacle. The exact mechanism remains disputed. Some reconstructions imagine a hand-operated force pump similar to devices used for moving water. Others propose pressurized vessels heated or pumped before discharge. Scholars continue to debate how much pressure Byzantine equipment could safely produce aboard a moving ship. The surviving texts do not provide technical diagrams, so every modern model requires interpretation. That uncertainty has kept the siphon almost as mysterious as the fuel itself. Ancient engineers had long understood piston pumps. Greek and Roman writers described mechanisms capable of lifting water, and firefighting equipment used pressure to project streams at useful distances. These earlier machines prove that the principle was available. The challenge lies in adapting it to combustible liquid, naval movement, and combat conditions. That adaptation may have been the truly remarkable achievement. A warship is a terrible laboratory. Nothing stays still. Saltwater corrodes metal and leather. Heat affects seals, vibration loosens fittings, men become exhausted. Enemy arrows strike exposed areas. A pump that works beautifully on land may behave unpredictably when tilted by waves. Every successful discharge therefore suggests not only a suitable design, but an experienced crew capable of managing constant imperfections. The nozzle itself may have shaped the weapon's reputation. A narrow opening increases speed but may restrict thick fuel. A wider opening allows heavier mixtures but reduces pressure. Engineers must balance these demands through repeated testing. They do not calculate with modern equations, yet they can still learn through observation. A craftsman changes a diameter, watches the result, and remembers what works. One unusual detail in Byzantine imagery shows animal-shaped metal projections associated with fire weapons. Some depictions suggest dragon or lion heads through which flame appears to emerge. Whether these images represent actual decorative nozzles or symbolic artistic conventions remains uncertain. The idea is wonderfully theatrical, but it may also have practical roots. A sculpted metal head could conceal or reinforce a projecting tube while adding psychological effect. Imagine seeing such a device from the opposing deck. Smoke curls around a bronze mouth. A sudden burst of flame appears where a carved animal's jaws should be. You do not know whether the creature is decorative, religious, or merely mechanical. You only know that fire is coming toward you. Medieval warfare rarely wastes an opportunity to frighten the enemy. The crew operating the siphon must coordinate with the helmsman. Wind direction becomes critical because flame and smoke can blow backward. The ship needs a favourable angle. Distance must be judged without instruments. Officers probably rely on experience, watching the movement of waves and sails, horned enemy vessels. The moment of attack may last only seconds, but those seconds depend on careful positioning. Records from naval warfare confirm that manoeuvre was central to Byzantine fighting methods. Ships relied on coordinated rowing, formation control, missile fire, boarding, and specialized equipment. A projecting incendiary weapon fits naturally into this tactical environment. It is not a solitary wonder dominating the battlefield. It is one instrument among many, strongest when crews create the conditions for it to work. The fuel supply also imposes limits. A vessel cannot carry unlimited quantities without increasing danger and weight. Storage containers must remain protected from sparks, impacts, and accidental leaks. The crew may therefore conserve the weapon for moments when enemy ships come within effective range. This makes Greek fire less like continuous flame and more like a carefully timed strike. That timing could amplify fear. Long periods of silence allow anticipation to grow. Enemy sailors know the apparatus exists but cannot predict exactly when it will be used. They watch the Byzantine bow and search for movement around the tube. Every adjustment becomes suspicious. Then the weapon activates suddenly and the imagined threat becomes real. A fringe theory sometimes proposes that the siphon used explosive pressure created by chemical reactions inside a sealed container. Such ideas remain speculative because the evidence is weak and the risks would have been severe. A controlled mechanical pump is generally more plausible than a chamber depending on unpredictable internal combustion. Pre-modern engineers valued reliability, especially when working beside highly flammable materials. You can almost hear the rhythm of a hand pump. Wood creaks, leather flexes, metal fittings vibrate slightly. The sound is not dramatic, it resembles labour. That ordinary rhythm hides sophisticated coordination. Someone maintains pressure while another controls the nozzle, a third manages ignition, a supervisor watches the enemy ship and gives the command. Each person must trust the others. If one hesitates or moves too soon, the attack may fail. This dependence on teamwork may explain why captured equipment did not automatically reveal the secret. An enemy could seize a tube and still misunderstand the pump. They could copy the pump and still choose the wrong fuel thickness. They could prepare suitable fuel and still mishandle the ignition sequence. A machine is never only its visible parts. Modern experimental archaeologists have attempted to reconstruct projecting fire devices using plausible Byzantine materials. These experiments show that pressurized burning liquids can indeed be projected under certain conditions, yet demonstrations remain interpretations rather than definitive reproductions. Without an original surviving apparatus, researchers cannot know whether their successful design matches Byzantine practice or merely proves that one possible method works. That distinction keeps the scholarly debate open. Historical plausibility is not the same as certainty. A reconstruction can show that ancient engineers could have achieved an effect without proving exactly how they did it. The gap between possibility and evidence is where the mystery continues to breathe. The sea grows darker around the ship, a distant vessel turns broadside, and the helmsman adjusts course. The men near the siphon lean into their positions. Their hands know the equipment better than any surviving text ever will. Then pressure builds. The nozzle lifts slightly. Flame appears at its mouth. A burning stream crosses the night air, and for a few seconds the hidden machinery becomes visible only through its result. That is the strange power of the siphon. Everyone remembers the fire. Almost nobody remembers the pump. The weapon acquires another layer of power when it enters the world of ceremony. Constantinople does not separate war, religion, and imperial authority as neatly as a modern observer might expect. The emperor rules through law, armies, public ritual, sacred architecture, and carefully staged appearances. Victory is rarely described as a purely technical achievement. It belongs within a moral universe in which divine favour, imperial duty, and the survival of the Christian Roman state are repeatedly woven together. Greek fire gradually becomes part of that language, and its secrecy begins to look almost sacred. You move through a palace corridor lit by oil lamps. Incense clings to the air, mixing with the faint scent of wax and polished wood. Officials wait in formal clothing while guards stand beneath painted religious images. Somewhere beyond the walls, naval equipment is being prepared, but here the weapon is discussed through a different vocabulary. It is not merely useful, it is entrusted, it is practiced. Its possession can be presented as evidence that the empire holds something uniquely permitted to it. Byzantine political culture often connected military success with divine protection. Records confirm that emperors sponsored religious processions, public prayers, and ceremonies during periods of danger. Sacred objects could be carried through the streets when the city faced siege, while clergy and officials interpreted survival through a Christian framework. Historians at Harvard University and Princeton University have explored how strongly Byzantine rulership depended upon such symbolic systems. The emperor was not simply a commander, he stood at the centre of a carefully ordered sacred societies. Within that setting, a secret weapon could become something more than machinery. Later, Byzantine tradition claimed that the knowledge of Greek fire had been granted through divine revelation and should never be surrendered to foreign powers. The precise origin of this claim is difficult to establish, and scholars disagree about how literally it was ever believed. Yet its political usefulness is obvious if the weapon belongs to a sacred inheritance. Revealing its secrets becomes an offence against both emperor and faith. That idea changes the atmosphere surrounding the craftsmen who maintain it. Imagine being told that your work protects not only ships and walls, but the rightful order of the Christian Empire. Your task becomes charged with responsibility. A careless word in a tavern is no longer merely foolish. It might be treated as betrayal. A foreign visitor asking too many questions becomes more suspicious. A technician may guard a familiar procedure with unusual seriousness because secrecy itself has acquired moral meaning. The emperor also benefits from mystery. Rulers often preserve authority by controlling access to rare knowledge, impressive objects, and carefully arranged ceremonies. Constantinople is famous for mechanical wonders inside the palace, including automata described by foreign visitors. Golden lions could appear to roar, artificial birds seemed to sing, and the imperial throne was said to rise mysteriously. Some descriptions may contain exaggeration, yet they reveal a court fascinated by controlled spectacle. Greek fire fits naturally into such a culture of awe. A foreign ambassador who sees a magnificent palace machine may understand that the effect is mechanical, but the emotional impression still matters. The same is true on the battlefield. A sailor may know that flame must have a physical cause, yet knowledge does little to calm him when fire suddenly travels across water. Technology and theatre can strengthen each other. One quirky tradition tells of emperors warning their heirs never to reveal the secret, even under demands from friendly rulers. In some versions, the prohibition is justified with stories of punishment falling upon anyone who attempts betrayal. Such tales probably tell you more about Byzantine ideas of secrecy than about actual enforcement. Still, they reveal how military knowledge could be transformed into inherited mythology. The secret becomes part of what legitimate emperors are expected to protect. The palace itself encourages this sense of controlled access. Doors lead to guarded chambers, offices handle different responsibilities, court officials manage audiences through strict protocols. Not everyone may approach the emperor, and not everyone may see what happens inside military workshops. Byzantine government is hierarchical by design. Knowledge travels along prescribed channels, which means secrecy can be maintained through structure rather than constant intimidation. You hear a distant bell and the slow shuffle of sandals across stone. The sound is gentle, almost domestic. A religious procession moves somewhere beyond the courtyard. Clergy carry lamps and sacred images, while voices rise in measured chant. Citizens gather along the route, some praying for victory, others simply watching. The empire is reminding itself that survival has meaning beyond immediate strategy. In a society repeatedly threatened by invasion, plague, political rebellion, and economic strain, ritual provides stability when events feel uncontrollable. This is where Greek fire begins to serve two audiences. The first audience is the enemy, who fears the physical weapon. The second is Byzantine society itself, which may understand the weapon as proof that the empire still possesses special resources for survival. Even rumours can strengthen morale. If people believe the fleet holds a terrifying secret, they may feel less helpless when hostile ships gather near the capital. Modern scholars debate how much ordinary Byzantine citizens actually knew about the weapon. Detailed technical information was probably restricted, but stories could spread easily through sailors, soldiers, merchants, and families. Constantinople was a crowded city where rumour moved quickly, A spectacular naval victory would produce countless retellings. Each retelling could make the weapon more mysterious, more sacred, and more closely associated with imperial protection. This process does not require official propaganda in every instance. People create legends naturally when events exceed familiar explanation. A child hears that enemy ships burned on the sea, a parent adds that the fire could not be extinguished, a priest connects the victory with divine favour, a veteran insists the flames roared like an animal. None of these people needs to coordinate. Over time, the separate stories begin to support one another. There is also a practical advantage in allowing uncertainty to grow. An enemy who does not know what Greek fire contains must prepare against many possibilities. Perhaps water is useless, or perhaps shields must be soaked. Perhaps certain winds make the weapon sound stronger. Perhaps captured fuel cannot be handled safely. Uncertainty consumes attention, and attention is a limited military resource. A fringe interpretation sometimes suggests that Byzantine authorities deliberately invented supernatural stories to disguise an ordinary petroleum weapon. The evidence for such a calculated campaign is weak. Legends usually develop more chaotically than that. It is more plausible that official secrecy, religious language, genuine technical sophistication, and popular imagination combined gradually. The result is powerful precisely because no single person controls it. You stand beneath a high ceiling where lamplight trembles across gold mosaic. The emperor's authority appears permanent, though every empire is less permanent than it seems. Outside, a craftsman continue their work with bronze, leather, fuel and ore, and wood. Inside, priests and officials speak of protection to duty and rightful order. The distance between those two worlds is smaller than it appears. A pump requires pressure, a state requires belief. Both fail when the structure holding them together weakens. For now, however, the structure remains intact. The secret survives not only because guards watch doors, but because an entire culture has learned to treat the knowledge as something that should remain hidden. Technology has entered ritual, and ritual has become another layer of armour around technology. Greek fire is no longer simply a weapon carried aboard a ship. It has become an imperial possession, protected by ceremony, silence, fear, and faith. Secrecy becomes most effective when it is built into ordinary procedure. You enter a world where information does not move freely, because every office at a workshop, dockyard, and military unit has its own boundaries. Constantinople is full of people who know something useful, yet very few are permitted to know everything. An official controls materials, a craftsman knows a manufacturing technique, a naval officer understands deployment, a sailor knows the signals given during combat. The weapon survives because knowledge is divided, guarded, and transmitted through narrow channels that are difficult for outsiders to penetrate. The Byzantine state has a long tradition of controlling sensitive information. Diplomacy, taxation, military planning, and court appointments all depend on records that are not intended for public circulation. Imperial officials work within hierarchies where rank determines access. Historians at Yale University and Oxford University have studied the sophistication of Byzantine administration, showing how deeply the empire relied on written orders, specialized offices, and carefully maintained chains of authority. A secret weapon fits naturally inside such a political culture. You can imagine a shipment arriving at a guarded dock before sunrise. Heavy jars are unloaded beneath the eyes of soldiers while a clerk checks quantities against a written list. The workers carrying them may know only that the contents belong to the fleet. Another official receives the shipment and sends portions toward a restricted storehouse. Somewhere else, bronze fittings are being prepared by the craftsman who may never see the fuel itself. Nothing about this process requires a dramatic oath of silence. Separation does most of the work. Compartmentalization is a modern term, but the principle is ancient. If knowledge is divided between groups, theft becomes more difficult. A captured worker may describe one stage without understanding the next. A corrupt official may sell access to a warehouse without knowing how the stored materials are prepared. A sailor might describe the operation of a naval weapon while remaining ignorant of its manufacture. The state does not need absolute secrecy. It only needs to make complete understanding unusually difficult. Records from Byzantine military administration confirm that sensitive responsibilities were often assigned to specialized officials and units. Titles changed across centuries, and surviving documents are incomplete, but the pattern remains clear. The empire understood the value of controlled expertise. Naval forces, palace guards, tax collectors, and military commands operated through ranked structures. Such organization could protect technical knowledge even without a single surviving decree describing Greek fire policy in perfect detail. The written word itself may have been handled cautiously. Modern people often imagine a secret formula resting inside a locked chest, waiting for someone to discover it. That picture is appealing, but perhaps misleading. A complete written recipe would create risk because any stolen document could expose the whole method. The safer system is one in which crucial instructions remain partly oral, learned through supervised practice and repeated demonstration. Your hand rests on a cold iron latch as another workshop door opens. Inside, an apprentice watches a senior craftsman prepare a material slowly. The apprentice does not receive a book. He watches the order of actions, remembers the smell, notices the thickness, and learns when the master stops heating. A correction comes through a gesture rather than an explanation. The knowledge passes from person to person, protected by familiarity and professional discipline. This method has an unexpected weakness. Oral knowledge can remain secure for centuries while institutions are stable, yet it becomes vulnerable during disruption. Written texts can survive the death of their authors. Practical habits often cannot. A young apprentice who disappears during war may take years of partially learned experience with him. An older master who dies suddenly may leave no complete replacement. Secrecy protects knowledge from enemies while quietly reducing the number of people capable of restoring it after a crisis. One unusual possibility concerns family networks. Medieval crafts frequently passed through households, relatives, or closely connected professional communities. A father could train a son, an uncle could train a nephew, or a master could teach an apprentice who later married into the workshop family. There is no firm evidence proving that Greek fire specialists followed one particular hereditary system, but such patterns were common enough to deserve consideration. Family loyalty could strengthen secrecy without any official police watching every conversation. The empire may also have used deliberate misdirection. Governments often protect sensitive capabilities by allowing outsiders to hear incomplete or contradictory explanations. Byzantine diplomacy was famous for its ceremony, calculated ambiguity, and carefully managed information. It is possible that misleading stories about ingredients circulated naturally or intentionally. Yet scholars remain divided on whether false recipes were part of a formal secrecy strategy. The evidence is too thin to support certainty, and accidental confusion may explain just as much. That confusion benefits the defenders. Imagine an enemy spy learning that sulfur is essential. He obtains sulfur, mixes it with oil, and achieves disappointing results. Another informant insists that resin matters more. A captured sailor claims that a particular powder causes the flame to leap across water. None of the reports needs to be completely false. Partial truth can be more misleading than invention because it encourages confidence in an incomplete reconstruction. The complexity grows when terminology changes. Medieval technical language is not standardized in the modern sense. The same substance can appear under several names. While one word may refer to different materials depending on region or period, translators introduce further uncertainty. A term describing oil, pitch, resin, or naphtha may be rendered differently by later writers. Even a stolen document could therefore confuse someone unfamiliar with the workshop language surrounding it. You hear scratching from a reed pen somewhere in a nearby office. Boom, a clerk records deliveries, wages, or equipment. The document may survive for a year, a generation, or perhaps not at all. Most administrative writing is created for immediate use. Officials rarely assume that historians will inspect their records 1,000 years later. Lists are discarded, wax tablets are reused, parchment can be scraped and written upon again. Fires destroy archives, damp ruins paper and leather. Political change makes old documents irrelevant. The absence of a surviving formula may therefore be less mysterious than it first appears. There is also the possibility that no single formula ever existed in fixed form. Ingredients could vary with supply. Seasonal temperature might require adjustments. Different vessels might use fuels with different thickness. Experienced preparers could compensate by altering proportions without writing those changes down. If so, searching for one exact recipe may be like searching for a single correct version of bread. The process matters as much as the ingredients. A fringe idea claims that emperors personally memorized the secret and passed it directly to chosen successors. The story has obvious dramatic appeal, but it is difficult to reconcile with the practical demands of producing and operating complex military equipment. Emperors could protect access and authorize production, yet craftsmen were almost certainly necessary. A ruler might know that certain materials were important without knowing how to prepare them safely. The deeper pattern is therefore institutional rather than personal. Greek fire survives because the state maintains boundaries around knowledge. Guards protect spaces, officials supervise materials, masters train selected workers, naval crews receive operational experience. Each layer supports the others while preventing easy access from outside. That system is remarkably strong when political life remains orderly. It's also surprisingly delicate. You leave the restricted rooms and step into a corridor where the air feels cooler. Behind several closed doors, different fragments of the same technology continue to exist in separate human minds. No single lock protects the entire secret, because the secret is scattered across many locks. For an enemy, that arrangement is almost perfect. For history, it is dangerous. A knowledge system divided for protection can eventually become so fragmented that nobody remembers how the pieces once fitted together. Secrecy preserves the weapon while the Empire is capable of maintaining the structure around it. The very method that keeps outsiders ignorant also ensures that, if enough links disappear, reconstruction becomes painfully difficult. The secret survives because it is hidden everywhere, and that is precisely why it can vanish. The chemistry of Greek fire invites certainty, yet every serious attempt to identify its composition encounters the same problem. The descriptions survive, but the recipe does not. You enter a quieter kind of mystery now, one filled with jars, mineral powders, sticky resins, dark oils, and the sharp odours of substances heated over controlled flame. Modern chemistry can explain many individual effects attributed to the weapon, but no single mixture has satisfied every historical detail. That tension keeps the subject alive. The answer seems close enough to touch, yet each plausible ingredient raises another question about storage, ignition, range, and behaviour on water. Petroleum remains one of the strongest candidates. Natural petroleum and related substances were known in regions connected to the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Ancient writers described naphtha, bitumen, and combustible oils long before Byzantine naval warfare reached its most famous period. Historians and chemists studying ancient materials at institutions such as Stanford University and Oxford University have noted that petroleum-based fuels fit several important clues. They float on water, ignite readily, produce heavy smoke, and can spread across wooden surfaces in ways that make extinguishing them difficult. You can imagine opening a sealed container and catching a bitter, oily smell. The liquid inside is not uniform like modern refined fuel. Natural petroleum varies according to source, to temperature, and processing. One batch may be thin enough to flow quickly through a tube. Another may contain heavier material that clings more strongly to timber. If Byzantine preparers learned how to adjust such differences, their expertise may have involved refining and blending rather than simply obtaining one rare substance. Resin provides another attractive possibility. Pine resins and related materials were widely available and useful in shipbuilding, waterproofing, adhesives, and firemaking. Mixed with petroleum, resin could increase viscosity and help burning fuel adhere to an enemy vessel. That property would be valuable in naval combat. A thin liquid might splash away, while a thicker mixture could cling to planks, ropes, cloth, and protective coverings. The weapon would become not merely hot, but stubborn. Records confirm that ancient and medieval armies regularly used mixtures of pitch, resin, oil, and other combustible substances. Greek fire therefore did not appear in a technological vacuum. Its uniqueness may have depended upon proportions, preparation, and delivery rather than completely unknown materials. This possibility disappoints anyone hoping for a mysterious lost element, but it fits the pattern of historical invention. Extraordinary results often emerge from clever combinations of ordinary materials. Sulfur is frequently added to modern reconstructions. It burns readily, produces a distinctive odour, and was familiar in ancient pyrotechnic and medicinal contexts. Sulfur could influence ignition and combustion, though its exact role remains uncertain. Adding too much may alter fuel behaviour in unhelpful ways. A Byzantine preparer would not think in terms of modern molecular chemistry, yet repeated experimentation could reveal which mixtures burned hotter, spread farther, or remained stable during storage. Your nose almost catches the imagined smell. Smoke thickens beneath a workshop roof, and someone opens a shutter. Quicklime creates one of the more persistent theories. When quicklime contacts water, it releases heat through a chemical reaction. That fact has encouraged speculation that Greek fire might ignite spontaneously when exposed to seawater. The idea is dramatic and superficially elegant. Yet modern experiments have shown that turning this reaction into reliable ignition for a large petroleum-based weapon is much harder than popular retellings suggest. The heat produced is real, but controlling it effectively presents serious practical problems. Scientists publishing research on historical materials in journals such as Nature have repeatedly shown how useful experimental reconstruction can be, while also revealing its limits. You can demonstrate that a proposed mixture behaves plausibly without proving that Byzantine craftsmen used it. Several different recipes may produce flames that spread across water. Several pumping systems may project burning liquid. Experimental success narrows possibilities, but it does not identify the original method with certainty. This uncertainty creates an open scholarly debate over whether Greek fire had one stable composition at all. Some historians favour a relatively consistent petroleum-based formula guarded by the imperial state. Others argue that the term may cover a family of incendiary mixtures used across different centuries. Supplies change, workshops adapt, political borders shift. A fuel source available in one decade may become difficult to obtain in another. Skilled technicians could alter ingredients while preserving the weapon's general battlefield effect. Saltpeter occasionally appears in fringe reconstructions, especially when people imagine Greek fire as an early relative of gunpowder. The suggestion is tempting because saltpeter later becomes central to explosive technology. Yet evidence for its essential role in classic Byzantine Greek fire is weak. Gunpowder combustion also behaves differently from a projected burning liquid. Blending later technologies backward into earlier periods risks creating a weapon that belongs more to modern imagination than medieval evidence. Other proposed ingredients include animal fats, waxes, oils, calcium compounds, and various mineral additives. Almost any combustible material known to the medieval Mediterranean has been nominated at some point. The growing list can make the mystery feel hopeless, but it actually teaches something useful. Ingredients alone cannot explain a weapon. A successful formula must satisfy practical requirements beyond simply burning. It must remain usable during storage. It must survive transport aboard ships. It must move through the projecting apparatus. It must ignite at the desired moment. It must produce enough heat to damage enemy vessels. It must not destroy the crew operating it. These constraints eliminate many exciting theories quickly. Temperature adds another complication. A resin-rich mixture can become thick in cool weather and thinner when heated. Fuel viscosity affects pumping pressure and range. If operators warmed the mixture before use, they created additional danger aboard a wooden ship. If they did not warm it, the formula needed to remain fluid enough for mechanical projection. Small technical details such as these may have shaped the true recipe more strongly than any exotic ingredient. For a moment, you watch a preparer stir a dark mixture beneath lamplight. He pauses, lifts a tool, and studies how slowly the liquid falls from its edge. There is no scale beside him, no thermometer, and no printed chart. His judgment comes from repetition. Perhaps the correct consistency is learned through sight. Perhaps he adjusts it with a little more oil or resin until it moves exactly as expected. That kind of skill is difficult to reverse engineer. Modern chemists can measure every component precisely, yet they still lack the original process. Order matters in mixtures. Heating sequence matters. Purity matters. Storage time matters. Even the shape of a container can influence evaporation and separation. A formula listing 5 ingredients might remain useless if all the preparation knowledge surrounding those ingredients disappears. Combustion itself may have differed across batches. Natural petroleum contains compounds that evaporate at different rates. Some fractions ignite easily, while heavier parts burn longer. Byzantine technicians may have discovered practical ways to balance these properties without understanding them theoretically. They could judge success through flame behavior rather than chemical analysis. This possibility makes the secret both simpler and more sophisticated. There may never have been a miraculous substance unknown to modern science. The sophistication may have rested in controlling familiar materials with consistencies. You look across a stonework surface scattered with substances that seem almost disappointing in their ordinariness. Resin, sulfur, oil, mineral powders, nothing glows mysteriously, nothing appears beyond medieval capability. Yet combine the wrong materials in the wrong proportions, and the result is useless. Combine plausible materials with the wrong heating method, and the mixture separates. Force an unsuitable fuel through the wrong nozzle, and the weapon fails before reaching the enemy. The secret hides in relationships. Modern chemistry can explain why petroleum burns on water, it can explain why resin clings, why sulfur ignites, and why quicklime releases heat. What it cannot recover easily is the exact human method that transformed those properties into a reliable military system. Perhaps the lost formula was never a single line of ingredients. Perhaps it was a practice conversation between fuel, heat, metal, timing, and human hands. Water seems like the obvious answer when a ship catches fire. You imagine sailors reaching instinctively for buckets, hauling seawater over the rail, and throwing it toward the flames with desperate speed. Yet burning liquids can make that instinct dangerous, so if e-fuel floats, water may spread it across a wider surface instead of smothering it. The result can look almost impossible to those watching from nearby decks. Flames remain alive on wet timber, slide along the surface, and drift outward in glowing patches. Petroleum-based fuels help explain this behaviour. Many oils are less dense than water, so they remain above it rather than sinking. When burning liquid reaches the sea, the water beneath may cool parts of the fuel without extinguishing the entire surface flame. If sailors throw more water onto the burning material, they can sometimes scatter it across planks or between objects. Modern fire science makes this understandable, but to a medieval crew, the effect would feel profoundly wrong. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley and other major scientific institutions have studied the behaviour of liquid fuel fires in modern safety research. Their findings show how strongly flame spread depends on fuel thickness, surface movement, temperature, and airflow. Although modern laboratory conditions differ from Byzantine warfare, the basic physical principles remain useful. A floating hydrocarbon fire does not need mysterious chemistry to resist careless attempts at extinguishing it. You can feel the deck moving beneath your feet while men race toward a burning section of hull. The boards are slick with spray, smoke presses into your eyes, someone pours water over the edge of a shield, but the burning liquid flows around it and collects in a narrow groove between planks. Another bucket lands badly and pushes the fire toward a coil of rope. The crew is not foolish. They are responding with the most available tool they possess. That distinction matters because medieval firefighting at sea was brutally limited. Ships carried water, but not in quantities sufficient for large fires. Sand could help smother flames, yet storing great amounts added weight and consumed valuable space. Wet hides or heavy cloth might protect certain surfaces, but they were difficult to move quickly once soaked. A crew facing several burning areas at once could become overwhelmed even if each individual fire was theoretically controllable. Records from naval warfare indicate that ships were often coated with pitch, oils, waxes, and other substances used to protect timber from water and decay. Those same materials could worsen fire conditions. Rope, sailcloth, wooden fittings, and stored supplies created additional fuel. A vessel designed to survive years at sea was therefore filled with things that could become dangerous once ignition began. The wind adds another problem. A strong breeze feeds combustion and carries sparks into places the original burning liquid never touched. Flaming droplets may strike sailcloth or exposed rope. Smoke can sweep along the deck, blinding sailors trying to organize a response. A crew that cannot see clearly begins to lose coordination, and small delays become costly. You hear coughing near the stern as the smoke thickens. Orders become harder to understand. The psychological effect can be as destructive as the physical flames. Sailors who believe the fire cannot be extinguished may abandon disciplined firefighting too quickly. Panic changes how people move. Men collide while carrying buckets. Others cut ropes without considering what those ropes support. A helmsman turns sharply to escape the burning area and disrupts the ship's formation. One frightening weapon can therefore create several secondary dangers at once. A quirky medieval remedy sometimes mentioned in discussions of incendiary warfare involves vinegar. Certain texts suggest that cloth or hide soaked in vinegar could offer protection against particular fires. The idea probably reflects practical experimentation rather than any special chemical magic. A thoroughly wetted covering resists ignition better than a dry one, regardless of whether the liquid is vinegar or water. Yet sailors may have associated one method with success and repeated it as a preferred defense. Sand was probably more reliable in many situations. By covering a burning liquid, sand can reduce contact with oxygen and absorb some heat. The problem is speed. A thin layer may not be enough. While a large burning area requires considerable material, on a crowded warship, obtaining and moving enough sand under attack would be difficult. The ideal solution in theory may prove frustratingly slow in practice. Scholars continue to debate whether reports that water-intensified Greek fire should be read literally. Some historians interpret the descriptions as observations of floating fuel spreading when disturbed. Others suspect that later writers exaggerated the effect because the weapon had already gained a fearsome reputation. The wording of surviving accounts is not always precise enough to separate chemistry from dramatic storytelling. There is also the possibility that different versions of incendiary mixtures behave differently when exposed to water. A petroleum-rich batch might float readily, a thicker resinous mixture might cling more strongly to timber. Additional substances could change how the fuel broke apart or spread. If Greek fire evolved over centuries, then no single description needs to explain every recorded encounter. Your hands grip a damp rail as a burning patch moves across the water beside the hull. It does not race like a living creature. It drifts according to current, wind, and the movement of ships, yet from above, the visual effect is disturbing. Orange flame seems to rest directly upon black sea water. The natural boundary between fire and water appears to have failed. That image would be remembered. Sailors returning home might describe a sea that burned beneath them. Chroniclers could repeat the phrase because it captured the terror better than a technical explanation ever could. Over generations, the statement becomes part of the weapon's identity. Greek fire does not merely burn ships, it burns upon the water itself. Modern historians must resist the temptation to dismiss such language as superstition. Medieval observers were capable of careful description, even when they lacked modern terminology. A sailor, saying that flame remained on water, may have witnessed exactly that. The challenge lies in understanding the physical process beneath the language rather than assuming either miracle or ignorance. Another practical danger comes from the shape of a ship's hull. Curved surfaces can guide spilled liquid downward towards seams, lower decks, and storage areas. Burning fuel may disappear from sight while continuing to heat timber beneath the crew. A surface fire that seems under control can therefore leave smouldering material hidden in cracks and joints. The problem becomes worse if resin or pitch softens under heat. Protective coatings can melt. Carrying flame into new areas, timbers dry rapidly near intense heat and become easier to ignite. Ropes lose strength, leather fittings shrink or split, metal components become too hot to handle. The ship begins to fail through many small injuries rather than one dramatic collapse. A fringe suggestion claims that Greek fire contained a special chemical that reacted violently with seawater, and therefore grew stronger whenever water touched it. Quicklime is usually offered as the explanation. The reaction of quicklime with water certainly releases heat, but no evidence proves that this alone produced the legendary naval effect. The more straightforward explanation remains a floating combustible mixture combined with difficult firefighting conditions. This is one of those moments when ordinary physics becomes more unsettling than a supernatural story. Nothing needs to break the laws of nature. The weapon only has to exploit them. You watch sailors struggle with choices that have no perfect answer. Throwing water may spread burning fuel. Sand may be too slow. Wet coverings protect only limited areas. Cutting away burning material risks damaging the ship. Turning away from the enemy may expose the vessel to attack. Every response costs time, and time becomes precious when flame is moving across wood. The weapon's reputation grows from that helplessness. Greek fire is feared not because it is impossible to extinguish under every circumstance, but because it is unusually difficult to control in the exact environment where it is used. A wooden ship on moving water, crowded with combustible materials, is almost perfectly suited to magnifying its effects. The sea continues to roll beneath the flames, indifferent and dark, Water remains water. Fire remains fire. Yet under the wrong conditions, the two can exist together long enough to make frightened people believe they are seeing something forbidden. And perhaps that was all the weapon ever needed. Enemy commanders do not simply endure Greek fire, they study it. Every encounter creates opportunities to observe range, timing, smoke, ignition, and crew behavior. Captured ships are searched, prisoners are questioned, damaged equipment is examined for clues. Rival powers understand that no weapon remains mysterious forever if enough fragments can be collected. Yet Greek fire resists easy imitation because seeing the effect is not the same as understanding the system behind it. Imagine standing inside a captured Byzantine vessel after the fighting has ended. The deck is scorched, ropes hang loose, and the air still smells of smoke and salt. A bronze tube remains fixed near the bow, blackened by heat but otherwise intact. To an enemy engineer, this must feel like a breakthrough. At last, the mechanism is physically present. Measurements can be taken, seams can be studied, the angle of the mounting can be copied. Yet the most important questions remain unanswered. What fuel flowed through the tube? How thick was it? How was pressure created? Where did ignition occur? How was the crew trained to handle the device safely? A captured object reveals its shape, but not necessarily its method. Archaeologists and historians at institutions such as Harvard University and Oxford University have repeatedly shown how difficult it can be to reconstruct ancient technologies from surviving hardware alone. Tools carry only part of the knowledge required to use them. The same problem appears with prisoners. A sailor may know when to turn a valve without knowing what the fuel contains. A craftsman may understand the nozzle but never have worked near the storage vessels. An officer may know how to position the ship while remaining ignorant of manufacture. Question enough people, and fragments accumulate. The trouble is deciding which fragments belong together. Records confirm that Byzantine military enemies developed and used their own incendiary weapons. Arab forces, Rus attackers, and other regional powers were familiar with burning substances. Fire arrows and destructive mixtures. Medieval warfare around the Eastern Mediterranean was never technologically static. Knowledge crossed borders through trade, captivity, imitation, and diplomacy. Greek fire existed inside this competitive environment rather than beyond it. That reality makes the persistence of its secrecy more interesting. Byzantine enemies were not incapable of chemistry or engineering. They possessed shipbuilders, metal workers, military specialists, and access to combustible materials. If the weapon had consisted only of one obvious ingredient, imitation should have been easier. The repeated difficulty suggests that several parts of the system needed to be reproduced together. You can almost hear the frustration inside an enemy workshop. A copied bronze tube lies on a bench. Workers have produced a dark combustible mixture. The first test ignites successfully but travels only a short distance. A second mixture moves farther but burns too weedy. A third clogs the nozzle. Another separates during storage. Each failure provides information, yet none reveals which variable is wrong. That is the cruel elegance of complex technology. Failure rarely explains itself. An engineer may blame the fuel when the real problem is pressure. A chemist may adjust the mixture when the nozzle diameter is unsuitable. A commander may order stronger pumps when the fuel is simply too thick. Without access to the original chain of practice, experiment becomes a maze where several wrong answers can produce similar results. One curious account from medieval warfare describes portable forms of incendiary projection, sometimes compared with handheld siphons. These smaller devices may have thrown burning substances during sieges or close combat. Their existence suggests that knowledge of projecting fire was not limited to large naval installations. Yet handheld devices did not necessarily reproduce the full capabilities associated with Byzantine shipboard Greek fire. Similar appearance can conceal very different engineering. Scholars continue to debate how successfully rival powers copied Byzantine incendiary technology. Some historians argue that versions of the weapon spread widely under different names. Others maintain that foreign imitations lacked the reliability or tactical integration of the Byzantine system. These sources often describe several types of fire weapons without enough technical detail to distinguish among them. Terminology becomes especially confusing when later writers group different substances under broad labels. This confusion can mislead modern readers into thinking that every medieval incendiary was Greek fire. A clay pot filled with burning pitch is not the same as a pressurized naval projector. A flaming arrow is not the same as a liquid stream. A mixture that burns intensely on a siege wall may be unsuitable for pumping through bronze tubing. The medieval battlefield contains many kinds of fire, and only some belong to the mystery surrounding the Byzantine weapon. Enemy commanders also confront supply, even if they identify plausible petroleum sources. Those sources may lie far from their naval bases. Transport requires secure routes, suitable containers, and merchants willing to handle dangerous materials. A copied weapon that works once during a demonstration is not yet a military capability. Fleets need dependable quantities across many campaigns. This logistical problem often disappears from dramatic retellings. People imagine a stolen recipe changing history overnight. In reality, a recipe might demand materials unavailable in the required region or quality. A rival state could know every ingredient and still struggle to obtain them consistently. Knowledge without supply is only theory. The Byzantine advantage may therefore rest partly on geography and trade connections. Constantinople sits between regions producing different raw materials. Imperial networks can move goods towards centralized workshops. Customs officials and merchants already understand long-distance supply. Military production can quietly use those same routes. A fringe theory claims that enemy spies eventually learned the complete formula, but deliberately suppressed it because the weapon was too dangerous. There is little evidence supporting such restraint. Medieval states were generally willing to use effective military technologies when practical. A more plausible explanation is that partial information circulated widely, while complete reproduction remained difficult. Captured specialists offer another possible route. A skilled technician taken prisoner might provide valuable knowledge voluntarily or under pressure. Yet even this solution has limits. One person may know only his own craft. Memory can be incomplete. Translation creates mistakes. Technical vocabulary may not transfer neatly between languages. A term referring to a certain grade of resin could be translated simply as oil, destroying the precision needed for replication. Your ears catch the scrape of a stylus as someone records testimony. An interpreter pauses over an unfamiliar word. The prisoner gestures with his hands, trying to explain thickness or heat. The official writes something approximate. That approximation may be enough to ruin everything. Modern historians studying technological transfer emphasize that successful imitation usually requires communities of practice, not isolated facts. Universities such as Stanford University have examined how expertise moves through networks of people, tools, institutions, and repeated training. This insight helps explain why captured secrets often disappoint. A blueprint without skilled labor is incomplete. A recipe without technique is equally fragile. Enemy workshops may nevertheless come close. Perhaps they produce incendiaries that burn fiercely. Perhaps they build the projecting devices that function under favorable conditions. Perhaps captured Byzantine equipment inspires improvements of their own. The mystery is not that nobody else can make fire. The mystery is why the particular Byzantine combination remains difficult to reproduce, with the same reputation for reliability. There is also the possibility that imitation changes the weapon itself. A rival power substitutes a local resin, uses a different pump design, or stores fuel in another kind of vessel. The resulting device works, but differently. Over generations, borrowed technology becomes something new. Historians then struggle to decide whether they are looking at copied Greek fire or an independent development. This uncertainty keeps the evidence slippery. You step outside the imagined workshop into cool night air. Somewhere across the harbour, a captured tube rests on a bench beside several failed mixtures. The enemy possesses metal, fuel, workers, and determination. What remains missing is not necessarily a secret ingredient. It may be calibration. It may be timing. It may be habit learned through years of service. And so the stolen fragments accumulate without yielding complete mastery. The enemy can copy what can be seen, but the most important knowledge may remain hidden inside countless small decisions that no prisoner thinks to mention and no captured object can explain. The secret becomes more fragile when you stop imagining it as a formula and begin seeing it as a chain of people. One person prepares fuel, another checks metal fittings, another understands pressure, another supervises storage, another knows where the apparatus must be mounted on a ship. Another sailor has learned the timing required during combat. Each person carries a fragment. Together, they create a weapon. Separately, they possess pieces that may seem incomplete, ordinary, or even useless. This pattern is common in complex historical technologies. Researchers at Stanford University and the University of Pennsylvania have examined how practical knowledge often survives through communities rather than written instructions alone. A workshop can preserve skills for generations because people learn by watching, correcting, imitating, and repeating. The knowledge is distributed through hands and habits. Nobody needs to explain the entire system in words because the system exists around them. You enter such a working community quietly. A young apprentice stands beside an older craftsman, holding a lamp while metal is heated. He learns by noticing small things. The colour of the bronze matters. The sound of a seal being pressed into place matters. The resistance of a valve under the hand matters. Nothing is written on the wall. The lesson is happening anyway. Elsewhere, a naval crew practices with equipment that has no value sitting inside a warehouse. The men must learn how to move around it without obstructing one another. One sailor pumps, another controls the projecting tube, another watches the wind. A commanding officer decides when the enemy has entered useful range. The operation succeeds only when these separate skills merge into one sequence. Records confirm that Byzantine military forces depended heavily on specialization. Sailors, marines, engineers, shipbuilders, and officers performed different roles inside the fleet. The empire also relied on craftsmen whose experience could not be replaced instantly. A trained metalworker was not simply a pair of hands. He carried knowledge accumulated through years of practice, including techniques that may never appear in surviving documents. This division of labour creates efficiency. It also creates dependence. Imagine removing only one specialist from the process. The fuel preparers continue working, but the bronze fittings are no longer made to the correct tolerances. The mixture remains excellent, yet pressure begins leaking around badly fitted joints. A commander blames the fuel. The preparers alter the recipe unnecessarily. Performance becomes worse. Nobody understands that the original problem belonged to metalworking. Now imagine the opposite. The apparatus survives, but experienced fuel preparers disappear. The new mixture burns impressively in an open dish, yet moves poorly through the device. The pump operators compensate by working harder. Seals wear out faster. Sailors conclude that the machinery is aging. Again, the real problem sits elsewhere in the chain. Complex systems often fail this way. One broken link creates symptoms that appear in another place. A quirky detail from traditional crafts helps explain the danger. Experienced workers can sometimes identify materials by smell, texture, sound, or even the way a surface reflects lamplight. A resin may feel right between the fingers, a leather seal may sound wrong when flexed, a bronze component may ring differently if its thickness is uneven. Such judgments can seem almost mysterious to outsiders, yet they are simply refined forms of experience. That experience rarely transfers through short instruction. You cannot tell someone to listen carefully and expect decades of judgment to appear. The apprentice must hear good metal and flawed metal repeatedly. He must make mistakes under supervision. He must learn which mistakes matter and which can be corrected. Time becomes part of the technology. Your surroundings fill with small sounds. A tool scrapes across bronze. Leather creaks under pressure. Someone stirs a vessel slowly. Footsteps pass through the doorway carrying a crate toward the harbour. Nothing in the room appears historic. Nobody senses that future scholars might one day wish desperately for a detailed explanation of what these workers consider routine. Scholars continue to debate how many people may have understood the complete Greek fire system. One possibility is that a small group of senior specialists possessed broad knowledge across several stages. Another is that no individual ever held the entire process in precise detail. The surviving evidence cannot determine this. Yet distributed expertise offers a powerful explanation for both long survival and eventual disappearance. A secret held by one person is vulnerable to betrayal. A secret held by a community is harder to steal. But a community can die. War can disperse specialists. Plague can remove masters without warning. Political upheaval can interrupt salaries and supplies. A naval base can close. A family workshop can end when no apprentice remains. Each loss seems small compared with the fall of a city, yet technological memory is built from such small continuities. This is where written documentation could help, but written documentation has limitations of its own. A manual may explain what to do while assuming that the reader already understands basic workshop practice. Instructions might say to heat a mixture until it reaches the proper state without defining what that state looks like. A diagram may show a valve while omitting how tightly it should be sealed. Text usually records what writers believe needs explanation. Familiar knowledge often remains unstated. The problem is familiar even in modern life. A recipe can list every ingredient and still fail in inexperienced hands. A musician can read notation without reproducing the touch of a master performer. A carpenter can own exact measurements, while lacking the instinct that prevents wood from splitting. Technical cultures are full of knowledge that exists between instructions. Greek fire may have depended heavily on that invisible layer. A fringe theory imagines a hidden brotherhood of technicians guarding the weapon through secret initiation. It is a wonderfully atmospheric idea, complete with guarded chambers and whispered formulas. There is no strong evidence for such an organization. Ordinary professional structures offer a better explanation. Skilled workers already had reasons to protect valuable knowledge, especially when their livelihoods and imperial service depended upon it. You move toward the waterfront where a naval crew waits beside equipment prepared by people they may never meet. The sailor trusts the metal worker without knowing his name. The officer trusts the fuel preparer without understanding his methods. The craftsman trusts the storekeeper to provide suitable materials. The entire system depends on strangers performing specialized tasks correctly. That trust is institutional. An empire creates routines so that people do not need personal relationships with everyone involved. Orders arrive, supplies appear, wages are distributed, ships receive maintenance, apprentices enter workshops, officers train crews. When these patterns continue year after year, the technology seems stable, yet stability can conceal at a narrowing margin for error. If fewer ships use the weapon, fewer crews remain experienced. If fewer workshops produce its equipment, fewer apprentices are trained. If raw materials become harder to obtain, substitutions become common. Each change may seem manageable on its own, but the accumulated effect can slowly hollow out the system. The weapon might still appear in records during this decline. A chronicler could mention fire ships without knowing whether the old apparatus still performed exactly as it once had. Later generations might retain the name while altering the technique. The language survives more easily than the craft. You can sense how disappearance might begin without anyone noticing. A veteran retires. His replacement learns most of the procedure, but not every detail. A certain seal is made differently because the old supplier is gone. A fuel mixture becomes slightly thinner because another source is easier to obtain. The weapon still functions, so nobody considers the changes dangerous. Then another generation inherits the altered version. Knowledge fades by degrees. There is no single moment when everyone gathers and admits that the secret has been lost. Instead, confidence becomes uncertainty. People imitate procedures they only partly understand. Older explanations turn into tradition. A technique once performed through experience becomes something done because it has always been done that way. The chain is still visible, but some links are already weaker. You stand among sailors, craftsmen, officials, and labourers whose separate skills create something none of them could produce alone. Their collective knowledge is stronger than any recipe, yet more vulnerable than stone. The true secret lives between them. And anything that lives between people can disappear when those people no longer stand together. Constantinople changes slowly enough that people living inside it may not notice the full scale of the transformation. Streets remain crowded, churches remain active, and merchants still bargain beneath awnings where dust gathers on imported cloth. Yet the empire around the city is smaller, poorer, and less capable of supporting elaborate military systems. Taxes become harder to collect from lost territories. Fleets shrink, and workshops face interruptions that would once have been unusual. The city still appears powerful from the water, but the machinery behind that power is beginning to strain. Byzantine history is filled with recovery, contraction, and renewed crisis. Scholars at Princeton University and Yale University have emphasized that the empire survives for centuries, partly because it adapts repeatedly to shrinking resources. That adaptability is impressive. Yet adaptation also forces choices. A government that can no longer fund everything must decide which walls to repair, which soldiers to pay, which ships to maintain, and which technical traditions deserve continued investment. You feel the effects first in ordinary places. A dockyard that once handled many warships now sees fewer arrivals. Timber deliveries become less predictable. Bronze that might have been shaped into specialized fittings is needed for coins, repairs, or church decoration. Skilled craftsmen seek steadier work when military contracts become irregular. None of these changes announces the end of a technology, but each makes continuity more difficult. Political instability deepens the problem. Emperors rise and fall, court factions compete, generals rebel, provinces resist taxation. Civil conflict drains resources that might otherwise support fleets and arsenals. Records confirm that Byzantine rulers repeatedly faced internal struggles alongside external enemies, creating periods when the state had to spend energy simply preserving authority. A secret weapon becomes less important when the government producing it is fighting for its own administrative survival. The navy also changes. Maintaining large fleets is expensive because ships require constant repair, crews require wages, and naval bases require supplies. Wooden vessels decay whether they fight or not. Rigging weakens, hulls need treatment, oars break, skilled sailors must remain in practice. When naval budgets contract, experience disappears faster than ships. Your mind drifts toward a quiet harbour at dawn. Several berths stand empty where warships once crowded together. A few older vessels remain, their sides patched with newer timber. Sailors scrape barnacles from hulls while officers argue over missing supplies. The harbour is not abandoned, it is simply less busy. That difference matters. Technologies often disappear through reduced use rather than sudden prohibition. If Greek fire is deployed less frequently, fewer crews receive regular training, fewer specialists are needed to prepare equipment, workshops may combine responsibility or close entirely. A technique once practiced every campaigning season becomes something remembered by older workers who are called upon only occasionally. The weapon can survive on paper longer than in practice. An official inventory may still list siphons and incendiary materials, even if only a small number remain functional. A chronicler may use an old term for a new type of fire weapon. A commander may order equipment prepared according to tradition, while accepting substitutions that gradually change its behaviour. Language preserves continuity even when material reality has already shifted. One curious feature of long-lived states is that old titles and institutions can outlast the duties that originally gave them meaning. Byzantine administration is particularly famous for offices whose functions change across centuries while names remain familiar. The same pattern may affect military technology. A weapon called by an established name might no longer be identical to the system once associated with that name. Scholars continue to debate how long the classic naval form of Greek fire remained in effective service. Some historians argue that references in later centuries suggest substantial continuity. Others suspect that the terminology becomes increasingly broad, covering several incendiary methods. The evidence does not provide a clean date when the original system suddenly vanishes. Decline appears uneven. Trade routes complicate matters further. Political changes in the Eastern Mediterranean alter access to raw materials, regions supplying petroleum, resins, metals, or specialized goods may fall under different rulers. Merchants can still cross borders, but military planners cannot assume uninterrupted supply. A mixture dependent on reliable ingredients becomes harder to standardize when those ingredients arrive irregularly. Substitution then becomes tempting. A workshop uses a different resin because the usual shipment has not arrived. Another source of oil is accepted because it is cheaper. A metal fitting is made thinner because bronze is scarce. Each adjustment appears reasonable. The weapon still works, perhaps slightly less reliably. Over time, the accumulated compromises become significant. A fringe interpretation suggests that Byzantine authorities intentionally abandoned Greek fire once enemy powers learned enough to defend against it. There is little evidence for a deliberate decision of that kind. Military technologies rarely disappear because one ruler simply declares them obsolete. More often, changing conditions make them less practical, and institutional support quietly drains away. The changing nature of warfare also matters. Naval battles do not occur under identical conditions across centuries. Enemies adopt different defensive methods and tactics. Coastal fortifications shift in importance. Campaigns move inland. The empire increasingly relies on diplomacy, mercenaries, alliances, and regional forces in ways that alter traditional military priorities. You can sense the pressure inside a workshop receiving fewer orders. Apprentices are not replaced as quickly. Experienced men divide their time between military work and civilian commissions. Tools remain on the walls, but some gather dust. A master still knows how to prepare a difficult component, yet there may be nobody young enough to watch closely. Knowledge grows old with its holders. The economic structure of Constantinople also changes under the influence of powerful merchant communities from Italian maritime cities, Venice, Genoa, and other commercial powers gain increasing privileges within Byzantine trade. Their ships move through waters once more tightly controlled by imperial fleets. This does not immediately erase Byzantine naval capability, but it alters the balance of maritime power. Historians at Oxford University have studied how these commercial arrangements bring both benefits and dependence. Foreign merchants supply goods, credit, and shipping. Yet their growing influence can reduce the state's direct control over maritime resources. An empire relying more heavily on outside shipping has fewer reasons to maintain every traditional naval specialization at former levels. The effects are subtle. An arsenal receives fewer repairs because commercial ships now carry goods once moved by imperial vessels. A naval unit shrinks because patrol duties are shared or neglected. A specialist retires because his craft no longer guarantees steady employment. No chronicler pauses to announce that one more piece of Greek fire knowledge has become vulnerable. Then comes demographic strain. Epidemics, warfare, and migration repeatedly affect the population of the empire. Skilled communities are never immune. A disease outbreak does not distinguish between an ordinary labourer and the only craftsman capable of producing a particular valve correctly. When populations recover, specialised knowledge may not recover with them. This is one reason institutional memory matters. A strong system replaces losses through training and redundancy. A weakened system relies increasingly on a few individuals. The technology appears to survive, but the margin of safety narrows. For a moment, the city still looks magnificent. Sunlight touches domes and walls, bells ring across neighbourhoods crowded with bakeries, baths, workshops, and markets. Foreign merchants unload cargo near the waterfront. Children chase one another through narrow streets. Nothing about the scene announces technological collapse. That is exactly why the disappearance is easy to miss. The secret is not taken in one dramatic theft. It is worn down by missed payments, reduced fleets, uncertain home supply, political struggle, aging specialists, and changing military needs. Each loss is small enough to survive, or together they alter the conditions that once made the weapon reliable. A city can keep its walls while losing the skills that once defended them. A state can remember a weapon's name while forgetting the precise world required to make it work. And somewhere inside Constantinople, an old craftsman closes a workshop door at dusk, carrying with him a few details that nobody has thought important enough to write down. The arsenal does not fall silent in a single night. Its decline is quieter than that, almost polite, as though the city itself is reluctant to admit what is happening. You pass through rooms where tools still hang in their proper places, yet fewer hands reach for them. Storage vessels remain stacked against stone walls, but some are empty. Bronze fittings wait on shelves without any ship assigned to receive them. The old routines continue, though less frequently, and the pauses between orders grow longer. A technology can survive many years in such a half-life, still remembered, still respected, yet increasingly difficult to summon when needed. By the later Byzantine centuries, references to the classic naval weapon become less clear. Chronicles continue to describe incendiaries, burning vessels, and forms of projected fire, but the details are often vague. Historians at Oxford University and Princeton University have noted how difficult it becomes to distinguish traditional Greek fire from other medieval fire weapons in these later accounts. The language survives, but the technical identity grows uncertain. A familiar name may cover several devices that no longer match the earlier system exactly. You hear the difference in the harbour. Large formations of specialised imperial ships are less common. Foreign merchant vessels crowd certain quays, carrying cargo under privileges granted by emperors who need commerce more than pride. Naval responsibilities become fragmented among imperial forces, provincial commands, allies, and hired sailors. The conditions that once supported specialised equipment become hard to maintain. A weapon designed for disciplined fleet action loses some of its value when the fleet itself changes shape. Records confirm that Byzantine naval power declined unevenly rather than disappearing completely. Emperors still built ships and fought at sea, sometimes with remarkable energy, yet the state no longer possessed the same secure command of eastern Mediterranean waters it had enjoyed during the stronger periods. Italian maritime republics became increasingly influential, While regional rivals develop their own fleets, the Empire remains dangerous. But its naval institutions are no longer dominant enough to preserve every old specialization without strain. A workshop master may now receive an order only once every few years. His assistants know the ordinary tasks well, but the most delicate procedures are practiced too rarely. Memory becomes less reliable when it's not refreshed. A seal must be fitted according to an old method, yet nobody can remember whether the leather should be soaked first. A mixture should be warmed, but the precise point is disputed. The difference between knowing and remembering begins to matter. One peculiar feature of technical decline is that people often continue using ceremonial language long after practical knowledge has weakened. An officer may insist that an old device is prepared according to imperial tradition, even when substitutions have become routine. A craftsman may repeat a formula inherited from his teacher without understanding why one ingredient was originally important. Tradition protects continuity, but it can also conceal deterioration. You walk past a stone room where smoke stains darken the ceiling. The smell of resin has faded from the walls. Scholars debate whether the classic siphon system remained fully operational into the final centuries of Byzantium. Some argue that late references show continued knowledge of sophisticated incendiary projection. Others believe that the old technology had fragmented into simpler forms, including thrown containers, fire pots, and burning mixtures used during sieges. The surviving sources do not describe enough technical detail to settle the issue comfortably. This ambiguity matters because disappearance rarely leaves a clean boundary. A technology can dissolve into related practices. One component survives while another vanishes. A fuel mixture may continue to be used even after the original pump is forgotten. A nozzle design may persist while the old preparation method changes. Later observers may still call the result by an ancient name because the effect looks familiar. The same process occurs in other historical technologies. Methods of producing certain metals, dyes, ceramics, or medicines can survive in altered forms while original recipes disappear. Researchers at Yale University have examined how craft traditions change when economic systems and labour communities are disrupted. What looks like continuity from a distance may contain several generations of improvisation. Greek fire may have followed such a path. The weapon does not need to vanish completely to become unrecoverable. A fringe suggestion imagines that the secret formula was deliberately destroyed by imperial authority once they feared it could fall into enemy hands. The idea is dramatic, but there is little evidence for a final act of controlled destruction. No surviving account describes officials gathering recipes, dismantling equipment, and erasing the knowledge. The quieter explanation remains more plausible. The system weakens gradually, and no single generation realizes that it is living near the end of the tradition. You can picture an older technician summoned to inspect equipment that has not been used for years. He runs his fingers along a bronze fitting and notices corrosion near a seam. The replacement part is made by someone trained in a different craft. It looks correct, but the proportions are slightly wrong. During testing, pressure leaks. The officer blames age and orders another repair. The old man understands more than he explains. Perhaps he knows that the original craftsman used a different alloy. Perhaps the leather seal should be cut from another part of the hide. Perhaps the tube must sit at a particular angle. These details are small enough to seem unworthy of official records, yet technical systems live through such details. When the specialist dies, the distinction disappears with him. Changing military priorities deepen the silence. Fortifications, cavalry, mercenary contracts, diplomacy, and tribute may demand funds once directed toward naval innovation. An emperor facing threats on several fronts must choose immediate necessities. Maintaining an expensive secret weapon for rare maritime engagements can appear less urgent than repairing walls or paying soldiers already threatening mutiny. The choice is rational. That is what makes it dangerous. Institutions do not usually abandon useful knowledge because they stop valuing knowledge itself. They abandon it because other needs become more pressing. A government spends less on one arsenal for a decade. Then another decade passes. Apprentices choose different trades. Suppliers disappear. A warehouse becomes a storage room for unrelated goods. Eventually, restarting the old system costs more than anyone remembers how to justify. The harbour still smells of tar and salt, but the sounds change. Foreign languages drift between ships. Commercial crews unload grain, cloth, timber, and metal. Imperial war vessels occupy fewer berths. A young sailor may recognise an old bronze projector without ever having seen one used. To him, it belongs to tradition rather than experience. One generation can cross that boundary quietly. An object once treated as equipment becomes an artifact. The last reliable use of a technology is often impossible to identify because nobody records the moment as final. A crew deploys an incendiary device during one campaign and stores it afterward. Perhaps another unit uses a modified version years later. Perhaps a workshop closes with several functional components still on its shelves. There is no farewell ceremony. The silence simply grows. Modern scholars are left with scattered mentions, uncertain terminology, and descriptions whose technical meaning has blurred. The historical record becomes thinner precisely when the question becomes most important. You can trace the weapon confidently when institutions are strong, then lose sight of it as those institutions fragment. That pattern is more revealing than a missing recipe. Greek fire disappears because the world, capable of producing the classic system, becomes harder to sustain. The arsenals do not explode. The craftsmen do not collectively vanish. The secret is not stolen in one perfect act of espionage. It becomes unnecessary often enough to become unfamiliar. It becomes unfamiliar long enough to become uncertain. And somewhere inside a quieter dockyard, a piece of bronze gathers dust while nobody alive can say with confidence exactly how it was meant to breathe fire. In the spring of 1204, Constantinople faces a disaster that no engineer can solve with bronze, flame, or carefully guarded knowledge. The danger comes not from a distant rival at the edge of the empire, but from a crusading army that has reached the city through a chain of debts, political bargains, broken promises, and opportunism. You hear church bells carrying across the water while foreign ships press toward the walls. Smoke rises from districts already damaged by earlier fighting. The city is still magnificent, yet its defences now guard a society exhausted by factional struggle and uncertainty. The Fourth Crusade had originally been called for warfare in the Eastern Mediterranean, but its course changed dramatically. Venetian transport agreements, financial pressures, and Byzantine dynastic politics redirected the expedition toward Constantinople. Historians at institutions including Columbia University and Oxford University have studied the complex motives behind the campaign, emphasizing that no single explanation captures the whole event. Religion, money, ambition, political calculation, and military necessity became tangled together until the Crusaders stood before the wealthiest Christian city in the region. You feel the tension along the waterfront. Venetian ships move with the confidence of sailors who understand these waters well. Their crews know how to maneuver close to fortified shores, and some vessels carry towers or equipment designed for assault. Defenders watch from walls where generations of emperors had expected attacks from foreign enemies, though perhaps not from an army claiming the same broad religious faith. The irony would have been impossible to ignore. Records confirm that Constantinople had already endured serious internal instability before the final assault. Emperors had been overthrown, restored, challenged, and replaced within a short period. Government authority weakened at precisely the moment when coordinated defense mattered most. Soldiers could still fight, Citizens could still resist, and walls could still protect the city, but political unity had become dangerously thin. An old military secret is especially vulnerable under such conditions. Specialized equipment requires command structures that know where it is stored and who can operate it. Supplies must reach the correct units. Workshops must receive orders. Naval crews must trust officers. If authority changes repeatedly, even a functioning technical system can become difficult to mobilize. The assault intensifies into April. Venetian vessels approach sections of the sea walls while Crusader forces attack elsewhere. Wind, tide, ladders, siege engines, and human courage all become part of the struggle. The defense is not effortless, and the attackers do not advance without danger. Yet eventually breaches appear, positions collapse, and fear begins to spread through neighborhoods beyond the fighting. Then the city is entered. For a moment, it feels as though the sound changes completely. Battle noise moves into streets where merchants once argued over cloth and spices. Doors are forced open, families hide possessions beneath floors or carry what they can toward churches. Fires break out in crowded quarters where timber structures stand close together. Smoke rolls between stone buildings, blurring familiar landmarks and turning daylight dull. The sack of Constantinople becomes one of the most destructive episodes in medieval European history. Churches, palaces, private homes, and public buildings are looted. Works of art and religious treasures are carried away. Valuable metals are stripped from objects that had survived for centuries. Manuscripts disappear through theft, fire, neglect, or dispersal. Researchers at Yale University and Princeton University have examined how cultural destruction during warfare can damage technical knowledge in ways that are rarely recorded directly. An archive need not contain a complete formula to matter. Shipping accounts, workshop lists, personnel records, repair instructions, and inventories can preserve the connections needed to understand how a technology functions. When such documents scatter, context disappears with them. You enter an abandoned administrative room in imagination. Papers lie across the floor. Some are trampled. Others have been carried away because the parchment itself has value. A broken chest rests beside a desk. Nobody looting the room knows which document might matter to a future historian. A list of workshop payments looks less impressive than a jeweled reliquary, so it receives little attention. That ordinary destruction may be among the most consequential. A secret weapon supported by institutions can survive the loss of a recipe if the people and workshops remain intact. It can survive the death of a craftsman if apprentices remain. It can survive a damaged arsenal if replacement parts are still manufactured. But widespread political collapse attacks all these forms of redundancy at once. Craftsmen flee, sailors change employers, officials lose posts, storehouses are seized. Trade routes shift toward new rulers. Workshops that once served the imperial government suddenly belong to a city divided among unfamiliar authorities. Knowledge that depended upon coordination becomes scattered across households, monasteries, ports, and refugee communities. One strange consequence of the sack is that objects from Constantinople travel far beyond the city. Bronze horses, religious relics, manuscripts, precious metalwork, and fragments of imperial ceremony appear in Western collections and churches. A visitor in another city might admire an object without knowing the workshop system that produced it. Technical artifacts can survive while the knowledge surrounding them vanishes. That possibility applies to military equipment too. A bronze component may be melted because its metal is more useful than its function. A pump may be mistaken for another device. A storage vessel may be reused. A damaged siphon might appear worthless to someone who cannot operate it. The very materials that preserve technology can be recycled into unrelated objects. A fringe idea suggests that Crusaders discovered the complete Greek fire formula during the sack and carried it westward. The theory has obvious appeal because the city contained military stores and administrative records. Yet there is no convincing evidence that Western armies emerged from 1204 with a fully functional Byzantine system. Incendiary warfare continued in Europe, but that does not demonstrate possession of the lost imperial method. Scholars remain divided over how much technical continuity survived inside the Greek successor states created after the conquest. Byzantine elites established new centres of power in places such as Nicaea and Epirus, preserving political and cultural traditions outside occupied Constantinople. Some military expertise almost certainly travelled with them. The difficult question is whether the complete infrastructure needed for classic Greek fire travelled as well. You can imagine a refugee craftsman carrying a small bundle through a city gate. He takes tools, perhaps notes, perhaps nothing more than memory. His destination is uncertain. Even if he knows one important process, he may never again work beside the specialists whose skills complement his own. Knowledge survives inside him, but the system does not. The Latin occupation also changes priorities. The new rulers face their own military and financial problems. They inherit a damaged city whose resources are divided among competing interests. Restoring every specialized Byzantine institution would be expensive and perhaps unnecessary from their perspective. Techniques tied closely to the old imperial navy can easily become casualties of administrative replacement. This is why the catastrophe of 1204 matters so deeply. It does not need to destroy Greek fire directly. It only needs to destroy continuity. The city itself eventually returns to Byzantine rule, but restoration cannot simply rewind history. Buildings can be repaired, offices can be recreated, titles can be revived. Skilled traditions are harder to recover once their practitioners have dispersed or died. You stand among damaged warehouses near the water. Ash settles onto broken timber. The harbour is still there, and ships still move across it, but the institutional landscape has changed beyond recognition. A secret protected for centuries can survive enemies at sea. It's far less prepared for the collapse of the house that guarded it. A difficult question now settles over the surviving evidence: was Greek fire truly lost, or did it continue under altered names and forms? The answer depends on what exactly counts as Greek fire. If the term means one precise Byzantine formula projected through specialized naval equipment, then the tradition may indeed have faded beyond recovery. If it means a broader family of incendiary mixtures used by Eastern Mediterranean armies, the picture becomes less clear. You find yourself standing between language and technology, where old names continue travelling even after the practices behind them have changed. Medieval writers did not use technical vocabulary with modern precision. Terms for burning mixtures could overlap, shift, and acquire new meanings across languages and centuries. A chronicler might describe liquid fire without explaining whether it was thrown in pottery, poured from walls, launched in containers, or projected from a tube. Historians at Cambridge University and the University of Chicago have repeatedly warned that terminology can create false continuity. Two writers using similar words may be describing different technologies, while two different words may refer to closely related practices. You notice how easily confusion begins. An observer sees a vessel releasing flame and reports that the Byzantines used their famous fire. Another writer copies the account decades later. By then, the original machinery may have changed. The name survives because it is culturally familiar, not because the device is technically identical. Reputation becomes a label. Records confirm that incendiary warfare remained common across the medieval Mediterranean long after the Classic Age associated with Byzantine naval supremacy. Armies used fire pots or burning arrows, flaming bundles, heated substances, and combustible mixtures during sieges. Naval forces continued experimenting with ways to ignite enemy ships. None of this proves survival of the original system, but it shows that the wider technological environment remained active. A surviving tradition can therefore hide inside adaptation. Imagine a workshop that no longer possesses the old pump design, but still remembers a useful fuel mixture. The mixture is placed inside ceramic containers and thrown by hand. The effect remains destructive. Though deployment has changed, a chronicler familiar with older stories might still call the substance Greek fire. The label survives while one major component of the old system has vanished. The reverse is also possible. A projecting device may survive while the original fuel recipe changes. Engineers could use different oils or resins because earlier materials are no longer available. The apparatus still throws flame, yet the chemistry is no longer identical. From a distance, the weapon appears continuous. Inside the workshop, it has become something new. You hear the quiet crack of pottery breaking on stone. Burning liquid spreads outward. One curious clue lies in the persistence of formulas for incendiary mixtures in later military manuscripts. Some texts preserve recipes involving sulfur, oils, resins, pitch, and other substances. These recipes demonstrate ongoing interest in fire weapons, but they do not reveal whether any were descended directly from the famous Byzantine secret. Written recipes are especially dangerous evidence because as scribes copied older material, altered measurements, and sometimes preserved impractical instructions without testing them. Scholars debate whether some surviving medieval recipes represent degraded descendants of Greek fire. One view holds that fragments of the tradition leaked gradually into wider military knowledge. Another argues that the similarities simply reflect common ingredients available to many cultures. Petroleum burns, resin thickens, sulfur ignites. Different societies could discover comparable mixtures independently, without inheriting one secret formula. This is a crucial distinction. Similar results do not prove a direct transmission. A baker in two distant cities may discover that water, grain, and heat produce bread without either learning from the other. Military craftsmen working with the same range of combustible materials can likewise arrive at related solutions. Convergence is especially likely when practical constraints are shared. The geography of the Eastern Mediterranean encourages such overlap. Traders move substances across political borders, sailors carry stories of enemy weapons, captured equipment circulates, craftsmen migrate in search of employment. Information does not obey imperial boundaries perfectly, even when rulers try to protect it. Pieces of Greek fire knowledge may therefore have escaped Byzantine control without preserving the entire system. A fringe theory suggests that the complete formula survived secretly in monasteries, hidden among medical or alchemical manuscripts. The idea has attracted considerable imagination because monasteries did preserve enormous amounts of ancient learning. Yet no manuscript has emerged that can be confidently identified as the complete operational formula for classic Greek fire. A recipe for a burning compound is not enough. The problem always returns to machinery, procedure, and context. Modern historians also face the difficulty of retrospective naming. The phrase Greek fire is now used so widely that it can blur distinctions within medieval sources. Modern readers may assume that every reference to sea fire or liquid flame describes the same weapon. Careful scholarship resists that temptation. The safest conclusion is usually narrower than the most exciting one. You move through an imaginary archive where pages smell faintly of leather and dust. A recipe lists several ingredients in uncertain proportions. Another describes a substance meant to burn ships. A third mentions a projecting tube without explaining what flowed through it. Each fragment seems promising until you try to fit them together. They almost connect. Almost. That word matters. The disappearance of Greek fire may therefore be partly a problem of identity. At what point does an altered technology stop being the same weapon? If a fuel changes but the pump survives, is it still Greek fire? If the pump disappears but the fuel remains, does the name still apply? Medieval people were unlikely to worry about such classification. Modern historians do because reconstruction requires boundaries. The same difficulty appears in many technological traditions. A ship design changes plank by plank across generations. A sword type evolves through small modifications. A ceramic style adopts new shapes while retaining old techniques. Historians must decide whether they are looking at continuity or replacement. The answer is often partly subjective. Greek fire sits at the extreme end of that problem because so little direct material evidence survives. One mainstream interpretation holds that the weapon's famous secrecy may itself exaggerate the sense of total disappearance. If contemporaries never possessed one universal recipe, then there may be no single secret to lose. Instead, several related practices could have declined, migrated, and transformed over time. The mystery then becomes less about a vanished formula and more about a technological tradition whose boundaries dissolve. That possibility is quieter than the image of a final locked chest disappearing into darkness. It is also more historically plausible. You can imagine a craftsman in a distant port preparing a burning mixture generations later. He has never visited Constantinople. His teacher learned from another man who once served on an imperial ship. The proportions have changed, the equipment is different, the name has changed as well. Yet somewhere inside the method survives a faint inheritance from older practice. No document records the connection. No one involved thinks it needs to be recorded. This is how knowledge can survive invisibly. At the same time, survival in fragments is not the same as survival in full. A violin string alone is not a violin. A bronze nozzle alone is not a naval weapon. A list of ingredients without procedure does not recreate a military system. Even if pieces of Greek fire continued across the Mediterranean, the integrated technology may still have been effectively lost. You are left with an uncomfortable middle ground. The secret may not have vanished completely. It may have dissolved. That distinction explains why modern reconstruction remains so difficult. Historians are not searching for one missing object. They're trying to identify the boundaries of something that changed while it disappeared. Perhaps the formula survived in altered mixtures. Perhaps the machinery survived in altered devices. Perhaps the name survived longer, or longest of all. And perhaps what vanished was not every fragment, but the precise arrangement that once made those fragments work together with terrifying consistencies. Gunpowder enters the medieval world slowly, almost modestly, before changing warfare beyond recognition. At first, it does not arrive as an obvious replacement for older incendiary weapons. It appears through experiments with saltpeter, sulfur, charcoal, fire arrows, explosive tubes, and primitive projectiles. You can imagine craftsmen handling black powders whose behavior seems unpredictable. Watching sparks crawl across mixtures laid carefully on stone, the new technology is dangerous. Expensive and imperfect, yet it carries one advantage that older fire weapons cannot easily match. It can create force from within a sealed space. Chinese sources preserve some of the earliest clear descriptions of gunpowder compositions, and scholars at institutions such as Harvard University and Cambridge University have traced how these technologies spread westward through military contact, trade, and translation. By the 13th century, knowledge of explosive mixtures is appearing across parts of the Islamic world in Europe. The transmission is not simple or linear, but the direction of change is unmistakable. Warfare is beginning to acquire new sounds. At first, those sounds are uncertain. A fire lance spits flame and fragments from a tube. A small explosive device bursts more loudly than expected. Soldiers learn that a confined powder charge can do more than burn, it can push. That discovery changes everything. A burning liquid attacks surfaces. Gunpowder can generate pressure. Once engineers learn to contain that pressure inside sufficiently strong barrels, the result becomes artillery. Early cannon are crude, unreliable and dangerous to their own crews. Yet even crude artillery introduces a new relationship between distance and destruction. A projectile can strike stone, timber, armor, or tightly packed soldiers without requiring direct contact with flame. Records confirm that cannon appear increasingly in European and Eastern Mediterranean warfare during the 14th and 15th centuries. Historians at Yale University and the University of Oxford have studied how early artillery transformed siege warfare gradually rather than instantly. Fortifications remained formidable, and early guns often performed poorly. Still, rulers understood their potential and invested heavily in metal casting, powder production, and specialized crews. You stand beside an early bombard as workers load it. The barrel is enormous, dark, and slightly irregular. Men carry powder in protected containers. Others maneuver a heavy stone projectile toward the muzzle. The process is slow, awkward, and exhausting. Mistake this machine for elegance. Then the charge. The sound rolls across the landscape with a violence older incendiary weapons rarely produce. Smoke bursts around the gun crew. Birds rise suddenly from distant trees. The projectile travels toward a wall with brutal simplicity. The significance is not that fire has disappeared. Fire remains essential inside the weapon. The significance is that combustion has been turned inward, trapped briefly so that the expanding gases can perform mechanical work. Instead of sending flame directly toward the enemy, engineers use flame to launch something else. This makes gunpowder technology easier to adapt to different military situations. Small guns can defend walls, larger bombards can attack them. Handheld firearms gradually appear, ships can carry cannon along their sides or on raised decks. A single explosive principle generates an expanding family of weapons. Greek fire is more specialized. Its classic reputation depends strongly on controlled naval use, close enough range, suitable weather, trained crews, and combustible targets. Cannon are demanding too, yet their tactical possibilities multiply rapidly. They do not need an enemy vessel to be made of dry timber. They can damage walls, gates, towers, and ships alike. The economics of military influence now begin to shift. A ruler deciding where to spend limited money must consider which technology offers broader advantages. Maintaining specialized incendiary systems may seem less attractive when artillery can support both sieges and naval combat. Metal workers are needed for cannon, charcoal makers, sulfur suppliers, and saltpeter producers support powder production. Skilled gunners require salaries. New institutions begin consuming resources that older systems once received. This does not mean Greek fire suddenly becomes useless. Military technologies often overlap for long periods. Bows remain valuable after firearms appear. Swords remain useful beside cannon. Incendiary weapons continue alongside gunpowder for centuries. The change is not replacement in one dramatic moment. It is a gradual transfer of attention. A workshop receives an order for cannon fittings instead of siphon parts. A skilled metal worker learns to cast gun barrels. A commander asks for more powder rather than more incendiary fuel. A younger apprentice chooses the technology associated with future employment. None of these decisions sounds historic. Together, they redirect expertise. One curious detail is that early gunpowder weapons could look less impressive than older fire devices. A sputtering fire lance or inaccurate bombard might seem primitive beside a well-operated Byzantine incendiary projector. Yet technological history does not reward beauty. It rewards systems that can be expanded, standardized, and improved. Gunpowder possesses enormous room for refinement. Grain size can be adjusted, barrels can be strengthened, projectiles can be standardized, casting techniques can improve, carriages can become more stable. Each improvement strengthens the technology without changing its basic principle. Scholars continue to debate exactly how quickly gunpowder altered military strategy in the Eastern Mediterranean. Some historians emphasize revolutionary change, especially in siege warfare. Others prefer a slower model in which artillery became decisive only after advances in metallurgy, organisation, and powder quality. The disagreement matters because technologies rarely transform societies at the moment of invention. They transform them when supporting systems mature. Constantinople itself offers a powerful example. By the 15th century, the city still possesses walls famous for surviving earlier sieges. Yet attackers now bring enormous cannon, capable of repeatedly striking masonry from beyond traditional missile range. The defenders respond with their own firearms and artillery. The battlefield has become a place where explosive force competes directly with architecture. You can feel the difference in the air. Older naval fire weapons create heat, smoke, and panic at close range. Cannon produce concussion that travels through the body. Stone walls shake, dust falls from ceilings. Heavy projectiles strike structures that once seemed almost permanent. The psychological language of war changes with the sound. A fringe theory occasionally suggests that Greek fire directly evolved into gunpowder technology, or provided a missing chemical bridge between ancient incendiaries and later explosives. There is little evidence for such a direct line. The chemical principles are different enough that the comparison should be treated cautiously. Gunpowder depends on a mixture containing its own oxidizing component, while petroleum-based incendiaries primarily burn through contact with surrounding oxygen. The more interesting relationship is institutional. Both technologies require controlled production, trained specialists, storage, and military organization. When gunpowder rises, it competes for precisely those resources. The new weapon does not need to steal the old formula. It only needs to become more useful. Naval warfare transforms as well. Cannon allow ships to damage opponents at greater distances, changing how fleets approach one another. Vessels must accommodate heavy guns, ammunition, and powder stores. Ship design adapts gradually around these demands. The tactical world suited to projected burning liquid begins to narrow. Incendiary weapons remain dangerous, especially against ships and siege structures. Fire ships, burning projectiles, and other methods continue to appear, yet they no longer occupy the same technological prestige. Commanders increasingly seek weapons that break fortifications, punch through hulls, and strike from farther away. You can imagine two workshops separated by only a few streets. In one, an aging craftsman tends knowledge inherited from older naval practice. In another, younger workers experiment with cannon casting. The second workshop is noisy, expensive, and unreliable, but it receives more attention from officials. Innovation follows power. Investment follows usefulness. Memory follows investment. This sequence helps explain why an old secret can disappear without anyone deliberately suppressing it. Once rulers stop treating a technology as essential, fewer people are paid to preserve it, fewer apprentices learn it, fewer materials are reserved for it, manuals are not copied, repairs are delayed. A weapon can survive enemies and still lose to budgeting. Gunpowder does not erase Greek fire from history. It changes the world around it until preserving the old system matters less. The lost secret becomes less urgent precisely because other technologies now promise greater military returns. The great irony is quiet. For centuries, enemies struggle to imitate Byzantine fire. Then warfare moves on. What spies cannot steal, changing technology can make unnecessary. Modern scholars approach Greek fire with tools the Byzantine craftsmen could never have imagined. Yet certainty still remains beyond reach. You enter laboratories filled with controlled burners, pressure gauges, chemical samples, reconstructed pumps, and carefully measured fuels. Historians stand beside engineers. Chemists compare ancient descriptions with physical behavior. Experimental archaeologists build devices from plausible materials and ask a simple question that becomes difficult almost immediately. Can a modern reconstruction reproduce the effects described in medieval accounts without using technology unavailable to the Byzantine world? The task sounds straightforward until every missing detail begins to matter. Researchers must choose a fuel, but no surviving container provides an unquestioned sample. They must choose a pump design, yet no complete Byzantine projector survives. They must decide how the flame was ignited, how far it travelled, and whether the fuel was heated before discharge. Every decision introduces assumptions. A reconstruction can be convincing and still remain only one possible answer among several. Scientists at institutions including the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the University of Oxford have long demonstrated how experimental engineering can reveal the capabilities of ancient technologies. Their broader work on historical mechanics, materials, and combustion shows that pre-modern craftsmen often achieved sophisticated results without modern theory. Applied to Greek fire, this means the basic mechanism does not need to be impossible. The challenge is identifying which plausible mechanism the Byzantines actually used. You watch a reconstructed bronze nozzle being secured to a wooden frame. The metal gleams under workshop lights, almost too clean compared with anything that would have crossed a medieval sea. Leather seals are tightened. A reservoir is filled with a dark petroleum-based mixture. A hand-operated pump begins to move slowly, and pressure builds inside the system. The first test fails. Fuel dribbles from the nozzle instead of forming a useful stream. The researchers adjust the mixture, making it thinner. The second attempt travels farther but burns too quickly. Another blend clings beautifully to wood but moves poorly through the tube. These failures are not disappointing. They reveal how many variables Byzantine operators must have controlled. Experimental archaeology is strongest when failure teaches as much as success. A mixture that looks perfect on paper may become useless once it enters a pump. A nozzle that projects water effectively may clog when resin is added. A fuel that burns fiercely in a shallow dish may behave unpredictably under pressure. Each failed test narrows the range of practical possibilities. Records from modern experimental work confirm that petroleum-based mixtures can be projected through reconstructed pressure systems and ignited successfully. Such demonstrations prove that Byzantine descriptions need not be dismissed as fantasy. A pre-modern force pump, combined with combustible liquid and controlled ignition, can create a frightening stream of flame. Yet demonstration is not identification. You smell the smoke before seeing the result clearly. A sudden stream of burning liquid crosses a controlled testing area and strikes a prepared wooden surface. Flame clings for several seconds, then crawls downward in bright uneven lines. From a distance, the effect looks remarkably close to the old descriptions. Well, the temptation is immediate. Perhaps this is it. But another team could build a different device with another fuel and produce something equally convincing. That is the central problem. Modern chemistry offers many mixtures capable of resembling Greek fire. Petroleum can be combined with resin, sulfur, wax, or other tinder materials. Some mixtures burn longer, others ignite more easily, some float better on water, several can be thickened enough to cling to timber. Without surviving chemical residue linked securely to an original Byzantine projector, visual similarity cannot settle the question. Researchers publishing in scientific journals such as Science and Nature regularly emphasize the importance of reproducibility and material evidence in historical reconstruction. A plausible experiment establishes possibility, not historical fact. This distinction can feel frustrating, especially when a reconstructed flame looks persuasive. Yet rigorous scholarship depends on resisting the desire to turn successful imitation into certainty. The ignition system produces another debate. Some reconstructions place an open flame near the nozzle, allowing fuel to ignite as it exits. Others explore heated components or burning material positioned at the mouth of the projector. Scholars disagree because medieval descriptions rarely explain the sequence precisely. Tiny difference in ignition design could dramatically affect crew safety and weapon reliability. Your eyes move toward the hands of the operators. That may be the most important detail. Even modern testers working under controlled conditions must coordinate carefully. One person manages pressure, another watches the fuel, another controls ignition, safety equipment stands nearby. The ground does not move beneath them. Nobody is firing arrows at the apparatus. A Byzantine crew had none of these advantages. This realization makes successful historical use more impressive. The weapon had to function aboard a moving wooden vessel, while men worked near open flame and combustible liquid. Whatever system they used was not merely chemically effective, it had to be operationally reliable enough for trained crews to trust. One quirky aspect of experimental archaeology is how quickly researchers discover that apparently minor materials become decisive. Leather thickness affects seals, metal surface quality affects leakage, the shape of a nozzle changes stream formation. Even the temperature of stored fuel can alter viscosity. Details almost invisible in chronicles can determine whether the reconstruction performs beautifully or fails immediately. This helps explain why modern recreations often disagree. Two teams may begin with the same general theory and obtain different results because their materials differ slightly. One uses modern refined petroleum, another uses a heavier hydrocarbon mixture. One constructs seamless metal components, another intentionally reproduces rougher medieval manufacturing. The tests answer different questions even when they appear similar. Scholars continue to debate whether modern materials accidentally make reconstruction too easy. Refined fuels behave more predictably than natural petroleum. Modern machining produces exceptionally tight fittings. Accurate measuring instruments remove uncertainties ancient craftsmen had to manage through experience. A device built with these advantages may prove a concept without reproducing Byzantine conditions faithfully. The reverse problem also exists. Researchers may underestimate medieval expertise by constructing crude equipment simply because it is old. Byzantine metal workers, shipwrights, and engineers belong to traditions extending back through Roman and Hellenistic technology. They could achieve precision through methods that leave little archaeological evidence. Pre-modern does not mean careless. A fringe experiment occasionally focuses on spontaneous ignition through quicklime or other reactive substances. These trials attract attention because they promise to explain stories of fire awakening upon contact with water. Yet controlled tests generally struggle to produce the dramatic and reliable effect imagined in popular accounts. The reaction can generate heat, but transforming that heat into dependable naval ignition presents serious obstacles. Other experiments investigate thrown vessels rather than large siphons. Ceramic containers filled with combustible material can shatter and spread fire across a target. Such weapons are historically plausible and easier to reproduce. They may explain some descriptions of Byzantine incendiaries, but they cannot account for every reference to a projected liquid flame. The modern investigator therefore encounters several overlapping technologies. A handheld device may explain one source. A ship-mounted projector may explain another. A thrown ceramic grenade may explain a third. Trying to force all accounts into one mechanism may create more confusion than clarity. You walk through an imagined research laboratory where tables are covered with notes, diagrams, residue samples, reconstructed fittings, and photographs from controlled burns. Nothing here resembles a hidden treasure chamber. The mystery survives inside comparison. One experiment proves that a petroleum and resin mixture can cling to wood. Another shows that a hand pump can project liquid over a useful distance. Another demonstrates that floating fuel can continue burning on water. Each result answers one question. None answers all of them. That is why no universally accepted reconstruction has emerged. Modern researchers can reproduce many reported effects separately, and sometimes several at once. What remains missing is proof that one exact combination matches the Byzantine original. The search therefore becomes strangely humbling. Modern laboratories possess analytical chemistry, engineering simulation, high-speed cameras, and precise instruments. Yet the essential information vanished in a world without any of them. The people who knew the answer did not need to explain it to the future. Then knowledge worked. That was enough. You watch the reconstructed flame fade across a test surface while smoke rises toward a laboratory ceiling. The experiment has succeeded beautifully, and yet the mystery remains untouched at its centre. Science can show what was possible. History still asks what was done. The search for Greek fire becomes clearer when you stop asking which ingredient was lost and begin asking which relationships were lost. A fuel can survive in a recipe, a pump can survive in a drawing, a nozzle can survive underground, yet none of these things can reproduce a weapon by itself. Greek fire appears increasingly like a system whose strength came from coordination. Chemistry, engineering, maintenance, training, storage, supply, weathiest judgment. And military command had to meet at the correct moment. Remove enough connections, and the famous secret becomes a collection of ordinary fragments. Modern historians studying technological systems at Stanford University and Harvard University have often emphasized that complex knowledge rarely resides in one object or document. It lives within networks of people, tools, institutions, and repeated practice. Greek fire fits this pattern almost perfectly. The fuel mattered. But so did the device carrying it. The device mattered, but so did the people operating it. The crew mattered, but so did the state capable of training, supplying, and organizing them. You can test this idea with a simple thought experiment. Imagine that a complete fuel recipe suddenly appears on a forgotten manuscript page. Every ingredient is listed clearly, along with exact proportions. The discovery would be extraordinary, but the mystery would not be solved. Researchers would still need to know how the mixture was prepared, whether it was heated, how long it was stored, and how it was projected safely from a ship. Now imagine finding an original bronze siphon instead. The dimensions could be measured, the metal analysed, and the seals reconstructed. Yet the fuel remains uncertain, the operating pressure is unknown, the ignition sequence remains unclear. You possess the machine, but not the habit of using it. The same problem appears in reverse with trained sailors. Give a modern crew a plausible mixture and reconstructed equipment, and they still lack Byzantine experience. They must learn how the device behaves in wind, rain, waves, and sudden changes of direction. They need to discover which sounds indicate danger. They must know when pressure feels wrong. They must recognize the moment when an attack is possible without endangering their own ship. Records from other historical technologies confirm how easily such practical systems can vanish. Ancient building techniques, specialized metalworking traditions, and early industrial processes have often proved difficult to recreate, even when modern researchers understand their general principles. Experimental archaeology repeatedly reveals that hidden knowledge exists inside sequences of action. The instructions may appear simple, while successful execution depends on details never written down. Your fingers close around an imaginary valve. It resists slightly. Is that resistance normal? Hop on normal. A Byzantine sailor might know immediately. You would not. That difference is technical knowledge. One quirky comparison comes from traditional musical instrument making. Two craftsmen can use the same wood, some measurements, and tools yet produce instruments with noticeably different qualities. Tiny choices involving pressure, drying, shaping today, and timing accumulate. The written design remains identical while the practical result changes. Greek fire may have depended on similar layers of tacit judgment, though the consequences of error were considerably less musical. The weapon also depended on timing within battle. Perfect incendiary system used at the wrong moment could fail completely. Distance mattered. Wind direction mattered. Enemy formation mattered. Sea conditions mattered. The crew had to prepare without revealing its intention too early. A commander had to recognize opportunity and commit the weapon when escape or counter-attack remained possible. This strategic knowledge cannot be stored inside a fuel container. The state surrounding the weapon mattered equally. Raw materials had to arrive from suitable regions, bronze components required skilled manufacture, replacement seals and fittings had to be available, naval bases needed repair facilities, crews needed regular training, officers needed authority to coordinate deployment. A system that expensive cannot survive through memory alone. Scholars continue to debate whether the loss of Greek fire should therefore be understood primarily as technological disappearance or institutional collapse. Some emphasize the missing formula and hardware. Others argue that these questions are secondary because even a recovered recipe would have been useless once the supporting military culture dissolved. The second interpretation has gained strength because it explains why fragments could survive without restoring the capability. You hear the difference between possessing knowledge and possessing capacity. A library can preserve instructions for building a ship while a society lacks shipyards. A smith can understand a metal alloy while lacking suitable ore. A commander can remember a tactic while lacking trained soldiers. Knowledge is and exists, yet capability is kimon. This distinction is essential. A fringe theory imagines that somewhere a complete Greek fire recipe remained hidden for centuries, guarded by a secretive family or religious community. Even if such a document existed, it would not necessarily revive the weapon. A person reading it in isolation might reproduce a combustible liquid, but still fail to reproduce the system. The fantasy of the hidden recipe survives because modern culture often treats knowledge as information. Historical technology was frequently knowledge embodied in practice. The difference becomes obvious when you watch a mastercraftsperson. Their hands move before explanation. They adjust pressure without measuring it. They sense when a material is ready. They hear an abnormal vibration before anyone else notices. Such skill can be taught, but only through time and repetition. It cannot be recovered instantly from a list. Greek fire may therefore have disappeared through a kind of technological unlearning. The term sounds strange because the societies are often imagined as accumulating knowledge steadily. In reality, they forget constantly. Languages lose words. Crafts lose techniques. Communities abandon tools. Economic changes make old practices unnecessary. War scatters specialists. New technologies redirect young workers toward more promising skills. Progress in one area can coincide with forgetting in another. The disappearance is not a contradiction. It is normal human history. You stand in an imagined storeroom where several objects remain from a once functioning system. A bronze tube rests against the wall, a cracked ceramic vessel sits nearby, a fragment of leather has dried into useless stiffness. A faded note lists quantities of materials that no longer arrive from the same regions. Each item contains evidence. None contains the secret. The secret existed in the relationship between them. That relationship also included people who understood equence. Which material came first, which component was checked twice, how long did pressure build before release, what kind of the wind made operation unsafe, which part wore out most often, which sound meant a seal was failing. These questions rarely appear in chronicles because they were routine to specialists. Routine knowledge is often the first knowledge history loses. Modern engineers can reconstruct many possibilities through testing, and some may approach Byzantine performance closely, Yet without the original working tradition, certainty remains impossible. A successful reproduction demonstrates that one route works. It cannot prove that the Byzantines followed that route. This is why the mystery survives modern science so stubbornly. The missing ingredient may be recoverable. The missing machine may be reconstructible. The missing culture is harder. For a moment, imagine all the parts restored perfectly. The fuel sits ready. The bronze device is fitted to a wooden vessel. The sea is calm. The wind is favourable. Every component matches the most plausible historical evidence. Still, someone must know what to do. Someone must trust the pressure. Someone must judge the distance. Someone must give the command. Technology becomes real only when knowledge moves through people into action. Greek fire was not simply stored inside barrels or guarded behind palace doors. It existed across an entire chain of human coordination. That chain could remain invisible while it functioned, because every person understood only what their role required. Once the chain broke, the surviving fragments became misleading. A historian finds ingredients. An engineer finds mechanisms. A chronicler provides description. A chemist recreates flames. All of them may be correct, yet none possesses the full system. Perhaps that is the deepest reason the secret could remain lost for more than 1,000 years. There was no single object to rediscover. There was only a vanished arrangement of people, materials, skills, institutions, and decisions. And arrangements are much harder to excavate than ruins. The waters around Constantinople are quiet beneath the morning light. Fishing boats move slowly between the islands of brightness on the surface, and the great walls stand above the shoreline with the patient appearance of something that has watched countless generations pass. You can almost forget that these waters once carried imperial fleets, enemy armadas, merchants, refugees, and ships equipped with a weapon whose reputation would outlive the civilization that guarded it. The city is still there in altered form, but the system that made Greek fire possible has become almost impossible to see. You walk beside the old harbour and notice how ordinary everything feels. Stone has weathered, timber has been replaced, streets have changed their shape. Modern life has settled over ancient foundations without asking permission. This is how history usually behaves. It does not preserve the past in perfect layers. It builds upon it, removes pieces, reuses materials, and leaves fragments where nobody expects them. Records confirm that Constantinople remained a major centre of political, commercial, and cultural life for many centuries, even as the Byzantine Empire gradually contracted. Archaeologists have traced changing harbour structures, workshops, fortifications, and settlement patterns across the city, revealing how constantly its physical environment was rebuilt. The survival of the city therefore does not mean the survival of every institution within it. Stone can remain when knowledge has already gone. You pause near the water and imagine the harbour centuries ago. Bronze equipment is being carried toward a warship. Sailors inspect ropes. A craftsman checks a seal. An officer watches the wind, somewhere nearby. A sealed container holds a dark liquid whose exact composition will become one of history's enduring mysteries. None of the people involved believes they are creating an archaeological puzzle, or at least as they're doing their jobs. That thought is strangely comforting. They do not know that future scholars will struggle to understand them. They do not know that their tools will disappear, their names will be forgotten, and their ordinary habits will become more valuable than treasures. They are simply trying to make a weapon function correctly. One final scholarly debate remains especially important. Did Greek fire disappear because its formula was forgotten, or because the institutions supporting it ceased to exist? Many historians favour the broader explanation that technological capability depends on systems of production and training rather than ingredients alone. Others leave more room for the possibility that specific chemical knowledge was deliberately restricted and later became irretrievable. The surviving evidence cannot completely eliminate either possibility. Perhaps the answer lies between them. A formula could have been guarded intensely while still depending upon workshops. Workshops could have declined while fragments of the formula remained. Craftsmen could have remembered certain procedures without understanding their original purpose, and political collapse could then turn partial knowledge into useless tradition. The mystery would not have one cause. It would have many. You can see this pattern in other ancient technologies. Roman concrete survived as a material tradition in some regions, while the precise combination of the ingredients and construction practices changed. Ancient dyeing methods persisted unevenly across communities. Specialized glass-making techniques moved between workshops and sometimes disappeared when those workshops closed. Historians at institutions such as Harvard University and Oxford University repeatedly encounter the same lesson. Human knowledge is not a single library, it is a living ecosystem. Greek fire belongs to that ecosystem. A quirky modern legend sometimes claims that a complete formula is still hidden somewhere beneath Constantinople, waiting inside a sealed chamber beneath an ancient church or palace. There is no reliable evidence for such a hidden vault. The story survives because it feels emotionally satisfying. A secret this famous seems as though it should have an equally dramatic hiding place. But history is rarely so generous. The lost knowledge may have disappeared in much less cinematic ways. A workshop roof collapsed, a storage room burned, an apprentice chose another profession, a craftsman died during an epidemic, a government stopped funding a specialized unit, a shipyard changed ownership, a military order was replaced, a manuscript was scraped clean and reused. Tiny events. Together they can erase an entire technology. You listen to the harbour sounds and imagine how easily such losses could happen. A hammer strikes metal. Someone calls from a dock. A cart rolls over uneven stones. A child laughs somewhere beyond the warehouses. Life continues while a piece of knowledge quietly becomes inaccessible. That may be the most unsettling part of the story. The disappearance of Greek fire does not require a final catastrophe. It only requires enough ordinary forgetting. Modern science can still approach the problem. Chemists can analyze petroleum behavior. Engineers can reconstruct ancient pumps. Archaeologists can examine surviving metalwork. Historians can compare chronicles from different regions. Experimental teams can reproduce floating flames and projected incendiaries. Each discipline brings another piece of the puzzle. Yet none can interview the person who knew exactly when the mixture was ready. None can stand beside the sailor who knew the safest pressure by touch. None can ask the craftsman why one seal was shaped differently from another. Those details existed inside living memory, and living memory has a short life. You might wonder whether modern technology could eventually solve the mystery completely. It is possible. A new archaeological discovery could reveal an intact apparatus. A sealed storage vessel might preserve chemical residues. A forgotten manuscript could describe a manufacturing sequence with an unusual precision. New analytical techniques might identify substances that older researchers could not distinguish. But even then, certainty would require caution. A surviving device might belong to a related incendiary rather than the classic weapon. Residue might reveal fuel without revealing its preparation. A manuscript might describe theory rather than actual practice. Every discovery would need to be tested against the wider historical record. That is how the secret should be approached. Not as a treasure waiting to be opened, but as a system waiting to be understood. You return in imagination to the water. The sun is lower now, turning the surface bronze. The city behind you has become quieter. There are no enemy sails on the horizon. No bells announce an attack. No craftsmen hurry toward a naval arsenal. Only the sea remains. And somewhere beneath that water, Perhaps in the imagination more than in the physical world, the memory of burning ships still seems to linger for centuries. Greek fire represented the ability of a state to concentrate knowledge into one terrifying instrument. Its ingredients mattered, its machinery mattered, its secrecy mattered. But the deepest protection came from something more fragile than bronze or stone. People remembered how to do it. They taught one another. They maintained the workbots. They supplied the ships. They trusted the system. When that human chain weakened, the weapon began to disappear. Not because nature reclaimed its ingredients, not because the laws of chemistry changed, because people stopped carrying the knowledge forward. Perhaps that is why the mystery feels so close even now. You already know that lost civilizations did not necessarily lose everything at once. They lost small things, a word, a craft, a route, a method, a particular way of shaping wood, a particular way of heating metal. One small disappearance rarely feels important, until you discover that it was the missing piece. Greek fire may have been one such piece. A weapon famous enough to terrify empires could ultimately become something almost invisible, preserved only through scattered descriptions and the questions they inspire. Its flame has gone. Its exact recipe remains uncertain. Its machinery has vanished. Its operators are silent. Yet the question survives. How did they do it? Perhaps one day an excavation will answer. Perhaps another fragment will appear in an unexpected archive. Perhaps the secret will remain beyond recovery, not because it was impossibly advanced, but because the human world that understood it has disappeared. And perhaps that is the quieter truth hidden beneath the legend. The greatest secrets of history are not always locked away. Sometimes they are simply forgotten. The sea darkens beneath the evening sky. The harbour lights begin to appear one by one, trembling upon the water. The stone walls become silhouettes. The old city settles into darkness, carrying thousands of years within its streets, found deacons, ruins, and memories. You remain there for a little while. There is nothing more you need to solve tonight. The fire has gone quiet. The city can rest. Now let the harbour become still. Let the distant lights soften until they seem less like lamps and more like small stars resting upon dark water. The stone walls no longer need defending, and the old ships no longer need to move. There is no alarm waiting beyond the horizon, no officer calling for the crew, and no hidden chamber demanding that you discover its secret tonight. You can simply listen to the imagined water moving gently against ancient stone. Somewhere beneath the surface, the past has settled into silence. The craftsmen have gone home. The sailors have put away their tools. The workshops are dark, and the bronze fittings have cooled. Perhaps the secret remains somewhere in the fragments of human memory, scattered across centuries like small pieces of pottery beneath the earth. Perhaps it has disappeared completely. Either possibility can rest quietly tonight. You do not need to choose between them. Let your thoughts become slower now. Imagine the harbour beneath a calm sky, the water breathing softly against the shore, the last traces of smoke disappearing into the darkness. Constantinople fades into the distance, not as a battlefield, but as an old city sleeping beneath layers of time. And perhaps, somewhere in that silence, the forgotten fire is still waiting patiently inside history. Not burning, only remembered. Let the water grow quieter. Let the walls grow distant. Let the story become a dream. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. Good night.